My name is Scarlet. I didn't think I'd tell my story, but here I am with a wild tale about my mother-in-law. I'll change names to protect my daughter and me. My story doesn't start with a crazy mother-in-law. I married my high school sweetheart, Daniel, when we were young. Daniel worked at his dad's company, so we were settled early. His mom, Jenny, really liked me, and with his brother, Devin, we were a happy family. Sadly, Daniel's dad died when we were in school. I had great years with Daniel and his family. But then, tragedy struck. One day, Jenny called me at work crying and said, "Scarlet, I have terrible news. Daniel was in a car crash. He didn't make it." I was devastated. I couldn't believe it. My whole world fell apart. I was 5 months pregnant with our baby, Lily. It was a really tough time for me and Daniel's family. Jenny, his mom, struggled a lot with the sadness. She became fixated on me and the baby. She thought Lily was Daniel coming back. She kept saying Lily was her baby and tried to control everything about my pregnancy. Dealing with Jenny was really hard. She threatened me, saying I couldn't move on or leave with my baby. Lily is always going to be with me and Devin. I have already set up a nursery in my house. She will come live with me when she is born. Devin will be your dad. He is Daniel's brother, after all. Jenny, I know you're having a hard time dealing with Daniel's death. Trust me, I'm just as bad, but you can't control me like this. This is my child and not yours. How dare you say this to me? Lily is my child. I will do everything in my power to keep her with me. Don't you dare think you can take her away. As the days passed, Jenny became extremely unhinged. We tried having multiple family discussions about her behavior. We said, "You need to stop being so obsessed with Lily. This is very unhealthy. Mom, we are worried about you. You're acting very strangely. I think you should consider therapy. The only one you should worry about is Scarlet. I know this girl. She'll run away with a new man once the child is born. She'll take away Lily and raise her with someone else. Devin, you can't let her do this. She is your daughter too." Mom, you're not making any sense. Daniel is the father of Lily. A new man will not replace him. I'm her uncle, and that's it. I will be there for her, and so will you. But ultimately, she is Scarlet's daughter. Jenny never listened to us. From hosting a baby shower for herself to demanding presents in the delivery room, Jenny did a lot of things. Just thinking about everything makes me have a panic attack. Devin did his best to control his mother. However, she never improved. The first serious trouble she made was just after I gave birth. She came to my room and asked to hold the baby. When I handed her my daughter, she ran for the door. Luckily, Devin was outside and stopped her with some nurses. From that moment, I knew Jenny couldn't be around my daughter. So I filed the case against her and let the cops deal with her. I was at first hesitant to get a restraining order. I wanted Lily to know her grandma, so I put some boundaries and hoped for the best. Jenny crossed all of them. She tried to take my daughter away several times. She also tried to convince and demand Devin and his girlfriend to adopt Lily. They refused because they are actually the same people. Jenny also didn't like the fact that I was seeing someone when Lily was 2. The last straw came when she tried to take her away from daycare without my permission. We found that she had planned to move to a different state. I immediately confronted her in front of Devin. "What is wrong with you, Jenny? How many times do I have to tell you that you can't see my child without my permission? Even the courts are with me on this. Still, you keep trying to take her away. Lily is my child, and she deserves to be with me. I'll keep her with me until Devin and his girlfriend get married. Then we will be a happy family. You can go have a new child with your boyfriend, Mom. You can't say or do things like this. We have already told you that Lily belongs to Scarlet alone. If she marries again, Lily will have a father figure. You don't have to worry about her." No. This is Daniel's daughter. I won't let anyone else raise her. She is mine and mine only. Scarlet is nothing but a woman. I will take my Lily away from this witch. By that point, I was completely done with Jenny. She never showed any improvement and instead got worse with time. Now I was actually getting worried for Lily's safety, so I decided to file a restraining order against Jenny. I knew that the restraining order would make her go mad. So before she could do any more damage, I shifted to a different country. I took a transfer and left without telling anyone the address. Only Devin knew my address because he was dependable. Jenny's behavior did have a lasting impression on me. I was always paranoid that she would take my child. The first year I moved was hell. Ultimately, I got therapy and decided to get better for my daughter. I was also developing a good connection with Carlos, who was a local resident. He was the reason I moved to the county. Carlos loved my daughter a lot. and they quickly formed a great bond. So I was sure that the relationship would work out. Jenny did find out about Carlos and tried to call me a cheating witch. I'm sure you have been cheating. I will never let you live in peace. I'll bring Lily back to me. Just wait. Jenny, I have a restraining order against you. I don't want to do this, but you have left me no choice. If you really love Lily, you should get therapy and get better for her. Don't tell me what to do, Scarlet. I don't need therapy. I only want my baby Lily back. I only want my baby Lily back. One day, I will take her away from you. Then all you will do is cry. That one phone call was enough to send me into a spiral again. Carlos and my therapist had a tough time soothing my fears. My paranoia skyrocketed again. My world got dark. Somehow, I managed to deal with the situation and kept all these conversations as evidence. Thankfully, with her horrible behavior, I was able to get restraining orders renewed every time they expired. My solace was in the fact that Jenny never knew my new address. For the next few years, things went pretty well for me. I was slowly starting to cope with my mental health problems and tackled Jenny at the same time. I can't begin to tell you just how many phone numbers I had changed. When Lily was 6, I married Carlos and began my life with him. Devin and his girlfriend turned fiancé were invited, but Jenny was strictly not allowed. When Devin went home from my wedding, he did call me about Jenny. Scarlet, Mom found out about your wedding. I think one of your friends posted a picture. She saw it. She's not happy about this. What do I do? Devin, I'm tired of running away from Jenny. Even after years of filing a restraining order, she keeps harassing me. I'm exhausted. Stay strong, Scarlet. I'm doing my best to handle her. I think your marriage and my engagement have given her fresh ideas. I'm afraid she will do something stupid. Don't worry, Devin. I'll be on the watch out. I'm not that naive girl anymore. Jenny can plan as much as she wants. I won't let her take Lily, and I was adamant to protect my child. I quickly ordered high-security cameras and installed them all around the house. I also briefed Lily's school and babysitter about Jenny so that she can't cook up weird stories. Carlos was with me through it all. Years of therapy helped me deal with the situation better. While the old me would panic and become paranoid, the new me stayed calm and made plans. I was seriously praying to God that Jenny doesn't pull any stunts this time. I won't let her get away with her antics. Jenny's last crazy episode happened very soon. That morning, I was at my office pulling an overtime shift. Suddenly, I was surprised by a call from Devin. To be honest, I had no idea why he would call me at work. For some reason, my stomach was in knots as I picked up the phone. Devin sounded panicked and said, Scarlet, you have to listen to me. This is serious. Mom just left me a message that she's bringing back Lily. I know you will never allow that. I'm afraid she will do something stupid. What the hell, Devin? I never gave her permission to take Lily. Hell, we have a restraining order against her. I think Mom is planning to kidnap Lily and bring her to my house. I've tried to change her mind, but I'm afraid she will run away with her if I push her too much. You need to stop her before she takes Lily. Thank you for telling me, Devin. I have no idea why Jenny still hasn't got the hint. Her behavior keeps escalating. She is adamant that Lily should stay with me. Mom is still obsessed with having me replace Daniel as her dad, but she's being very unreasonable. I know she needs help, but she refuses to go to therapy. I'm sorry to say this, Devin, but this time I don't think I can forgive her if she really tries to kidnap my daughter. I will be sending her to jail. Devin said that he understood my stance and why I would do this. He promised to be in touch in case something went wrong. Meanwhile, I started to plan a trap for Jenny. I knew that even if I left work right now, I wouldn't be able to reach home on time. So I picked up my phone and made a call. Then I simply sat back and waited for Jenny to show up. I had a very small hope in my heart that Jenny wouldn't be this crazy. Well, it turns out she is truly crazy. My house has security cameras covering the entire place. I was able to watch everything while driving back home with a friend. As I watched Lily play on the lawn, I spotted Jenny making an entrance. Guys, Jenny actually tried to take my daughter. I was absolutely enraged by her behavior. Even after what happened, she wanted to ignore the court and take my child. She did it in the afternoon, knowing that I wouldn't be home. However, she didn't know one thing about my life. Carlos and I had gotten married 6 months ago, and just inside the house, Lily's new stepfather was watching everything. As soon as Jenny snatched up Lily, she cried out for Carlos, and immediately he came and blocked the front door. Through the security camera, I could see that Jenny went completely white as a ghost. Then her jaw dropped. My daughter fought off her arms and ran straight to Carlos. There was one thing she didn't know about the new man in my life. Carlos was a police officer. To be precise, he was the sheriff of our county. Jenny just took one look at him, and her jaw dropped, specifically because he was still in his police uniform. He was just back from work and spending time with my daughter before I came home. The call I made from the office was to Carlos. He is the one who picked up my daughter from school and stayed home till I came back. Jenny stupidly thought that I would leave my daughter unsupervised. Instead, she found a living and breathing cop stationed at my house. I heard them say, "What are you doing here, Jenny? I know you are Scarlet's mother-in-law. I'm interested to know what brings you here." "I'm here for my grandbaby. It's time she spends time with me." "Who the hell are you, and where is my grandbaby?" "Well, first of all, you are not supposed to be in this house, and I also know that you don't have any visitation rights with Scarlet's daughter. I would suggest you tell me your intentions since there are cameras in the house." "Who the hell are you? Why are you in this house around my granddaughter? You're not supposed to be here." "I am not an unknown man. I'm her stepfather, and I have full rights to be here." "You are not supposed to be here since you have trespassed into my house, tried to kidnap Lily, and violated restraining orders. I have already called my mates to come and arrest you." No, you cannot arrest me. I'm not doing something wrong. My granddaughter belongs to me and Dean. I won't let Scarlet let a stranger raise Daniel's daughter. Only Devin is fit to be her dad. Listen to me, Jenny. You need to step away from this house right now. The cops will come and arrest you if I don't do it myself. Jenny kept arguing with Carlos while I hurried home to them. My friend from work drove me to my house. While I was watching the confrontation, Carlos kept warning Jenny that she would face some serious charges if she didn't leave. Well, Jenny decided to be a martyr and continued to try and argue with him. As soon as I reached the house, Jenny started to shout at me. She said, "You witch, you intentionally married a cop so that you can take away my granddaughter. This is all you're planning. I always knew you were a total witch." "Calm down, Jenny. You keep forgetting the fact that my cop husband is right in this house. Believe it or not, he will arrest you if you keep harassing us. I won't go down so easily. I'll tell everyone that you were cheating with Carlos before Daniel died. I will ruin your reputation and take Lily." "Carlos, you can add harassment and slander to Jenny's list of offenses now. Looks like she won't stop." Just at that moment, the rest of the cops arrived. They came inside the house and spoke to Carlos about the situation. When Carlos and I gave our statements, Jenny threw another fit. She started to scream and cry about how unfair and selfish we were being. She said, "You are a vile woman, Scarlet. You want to keep me away from Lily. You have no respect for Daniel's memories. Why can't you just give Devin my granddaughter? He's the only one who should be her dad. Now, you have some serious audacity coming to my house and trying to take my daughter away. What makes you think I will ever allow you near her again? She is my granddaughter. I have the right to decide who raises her. The courts are wrong. I deserve to be with Lily." Jenny took that opportunity to attack me again. Yes, this crazy lady tried to assault me in front of my cop husband and friends. She was immediately restrained, and Carlos looked extremely pissed off. He spoke with his colleagues, and in a few seconds, Jenny was taken away in cuffs. She did try to fight those officers, and that added another offense to her already extensive criminal record. She was taken away, but not before she could throw some insanely inappropriate comments towards me and my husband. After everything happened, I took some time off work to be with my daughter. She was still traumatized by everything, especially by the way Jenny tried to grab her and run. Even I am exhausted from dealing with Jenny and had a hard time balancing everything. Carlos has been a huge support to both me and Lily. Lily has even started to call him Dad. She does know about Daniel, but she also sees Carlos as a father. I'm so happy that my little girl is finally starting to have a normal life. Devin and I talked in detail about what went down. He did apologize for his mother's behavior multiple times. I assured him that none of this is his fault and he shouldn't take Jenny's blame. He was a great uncle to Lily and tried to replace Daniel. Devin continues to visit us every week to spend time with Lily and my family. He has since uninvited Jenny from his wedding and is planning to go no contact with her. Speaking of Jenny, she will be spending time in jail by now. She has managed to work towards an impressive list of charges that keeps getting worse. From what Carlos has told me, she will likely face fines along with a short prison sentence. She's tried her best to turn the judge against us, but even the lawyer knows she's a lost cause. We're still waiting for the final hearing, so I can't share all the details of the court proceedings. However, it looks like me, Carlos, and Lily will finally have some peace away from my crazy ex-mother-in-law.
I want a divorce, Elizabeth. Daniel's voice was cold, devoid of the warmth I had once known. 40 years of marriage, and it had come to this. I looked at him, his face illuminated by the flickering light above us. Why, Daniel? After all these years, why now? He avoided my gaze, his eyes fixed on the divorce papers he had nonchalantly placed on the table. I've met someone else, he said bluntly. Someone younger, more vibrant. The word vibrant stung me. Wasn't I vibrant enough when I was juggling jobs to pay our bills? Wasn't I vibrant when I nursed his ailing father, our child clinging to my skirt? I wanted to scream, to let out the frustration that had been building up for years. But I didn't. Instead, I took a deep breath and asked, "And what about me, Daniel? What about what I want?" "What you want," he scoffed. "You should have thought about that before becoming so complacent." Complacent. The word hit me like a slap. All those years of putting his needs above mine, of sacrificing my dreams for our family, and this was how he saw me. I felt a tear trickle down my cheek, but I quickly wiped it away. "Fine, Daniel," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "If that's what you want, but I won't go quietly. I deserve more than this, and I will fight for what is rightfully mine." He looked at me then, his expression a mix of surprise and disdain. "You think you can take me on? Go ahead, try, but you'll get nothing from me." I knew this wouldn't be easy. Daniel had always been stubborn, set in his ways, but so was I. And for the first time in 40 years, I was ready to fight back. As I left the kitchen, the papers still lying untouched on the table, I realized that this was not the end of my story. It was just the beginning. A beginning where I could finally be me, Elizabeth Hartman, not just Daniel's wife. The night air was cool against my skin as I stepped outside. I looked up at the stars, a sense of freedom slowly seeping into my bones. Yes, this was just the beginning, and I was ready for whatever lay ahead. I sat by the window of my modest apartment, a cup of lukewarm tea in my hands, gazing into the past. The early days with Daniel seemed like a different life, a different Elizabeth. Back then I was Elizabeth Martin, full of dreams and aspirations. We met at a friend's party, a casual encounter that blossomed into something more. Daniel was charming, his laughter infectious. I was captivated, believing we could build a wonderful life together. I was 24, he was 29, and the world seemed full of possibilities. Our wedding was a simple affair, but it was ours, and that made it perfect. We moved into a small apartment, our first home, filled with love and laughter. But the laughter soon faded, replaced by the harsh realities of life. Daniel's job was never stable. He drifted from one position to another, his salary barely covering his personal expenses. It fell on me to bear the financial burden. I took up a job as an administrative assistant, working long hours to ensure our bills were paid. "You're late again, Elizabeth," Daniel would complain as I walked in, exhausted. "I'm hungry." "There's food in the fridge," I'd reply, trying to keep the frustration out of my voice. "I'm not your roommate, Elizabeth. I'm your husband. You should take care of me," he'd retort, his words like daggers to my heart. I remember one particularly grueling day when I came home to find the apartment in disarray. "Why haven't you cleaned up?" I asked, struggling to keep the tremor out of my voice. "Cleaning? That's a woman's job, isn't it?" Daniel replied nonchalantly, not even looking up from the TV. I felt a surge of anger, but suppressed it. This was my husband, the man I had vowed to love and cherish. But as the days turned into months and the months into years, that love was tested, strained to its limits by his constant disregard and entitlement. I often lay awake at night, wondering if this was all life had to offer. Was I destined to spend my days catering to a man who saw me not as a partner but as a convenience? As I sipped my tea, the bitter taste mingling with my bitter memories, I realized that those early years were not just about financial struggles. They were about losing myself, piece by piece, to a marriage that was slowly suffocating me. But now, as I sat alone, I felt a flicker of hope. I had a chance to reclaim those lost pieces, to find the Elizabeth who had dreams and aspirations. It was time to rediscover myself, away from the shadow of Daniel Hartman. The years rolled on, each one like a wave eroding the shore of my self-worth. I remember the day we moved into Daniel's father's house. It was supposed to be a temporary arrangement, a way to save money, but it became a permanent fixture of our lives, a testament to the sacrifices I made for the family. Daniel's father, Robert, was a stern man. He had never approved of me, seeing me as an inadequate match for his son. Living under his roof only intensified his disdain. "A woman's place is in the home," he'd often say, casting a critical eye over my work attire. I tried to juggle my job and my responsibilities at home, but it was never enough. Daniel's expectations grew, his criticisms sharper. Why is dinner always late? Why is the house never clean? The questions were like lashes, each one leaving a mark. When our daughter Emily was born, the joy of motherhood was overshadowed by the mounting pressures. I remember holding her in my arms, her tiny fingers wrapped around mine, and wondering how I would manage. Daniel's contribution to parenting was minimal, leaving me to balance work, home, and a newborn. The years with Robert were challenging. His health began to decline, and the responsibility of his care fell to me. Daniel's excuses were always the same. "I'm too busy with work," or "I don't know how to take care of him." I remember one evening after a particularly grueling day, I sat beside Robert's bed, feeding him his dinner. His hands trembled as he tried to grasp the spoon, his pride warring with his frailty. "Thank you, Elizabeth," he murmured, a rare moment of kindness in our strained relationship. It was in these small moments that I found the strength to continue. But the burden was heavy, a weight that pressed down on me, squeezing the joy out of my life. As Emily grew, she became my beacon of hope, her laughter a balm to my weary soul. I watched her play, her innocence a stark contrast to the complexities of my life. I wanted more for her, more than the life I'd accepted. The realization hit me one day as I sat in the office, my mind wandering from the spreadsheet on my screen. I was more than just Daniel's wife, more than Robert's caretaker. I was Elizabeth Hartman, and I deserved to be seen, to be heard. But it would take years and a crumbling marriage for me to finally act on that realization. Years of sacrifice, of putting others before myself. It was time to change that narrative, to take control of my own story. As the years passed, the walls of our home felt like they were closing in on me, each day a repeat of the last, filled with unending responsibilities and a deepening sense of loneliness. Daniel's indifference to our family's needs grew, his presence at home becoming more like that of a distant lodger than a husband or father. It was a crisp autumn evening when I felt the first real stirrings of rebellion. I had just finished clearing the dinner table, the remnants of a meal eaten mostly in silence. Daniel had spent the evening as he usually did, buried in the newspaper or glued to the television, oblivious to the world around him. "Daniel, we need to talk," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He looked up, his expression one of mild annoyance. "What now, Elizabeth? I'm tired." "It's about us, about our marriage," I said, finding strength in my resolve. "Our marriage is fine," he replied dismissively, turning his attention back to the TV. "No, it's not fine. It hasn't been fine for a long time," I countered, feeling a surge of frustration. He sighed, setting down the remote. "What do you want from me, Elizabeth? I want you to see me, to hear me. I'm not just a caretaker or a maid. I'm your wife, and I'm unhappy." There was a long silence, the air thick with unspoken words. Finally, Daniel spoke, his voice devoid of empathy. "If you're unhappy, maybe you should do something about it. Change your job, find a hobby. Don't put it on me." I felt a sharp sting of pain, realizing that the man I had married, the man I had loved, was no longer there. In his place was a stranger, someone who saw me not as a partner but as a convenience. The days that followed were a blur of introspection and growing resentment. The more I thought about my life, the more I realized how much of myself I had given up for a marriage that was now nothing more than a facade. It was during one of those long, sleepless nights that I made a decision. I couldn't continue living like this, in a marriage devoid of love and respect. I needed to find myself again, to rediscover the Elizabeth who had dreams and aspirations before they were buried under the weight of others' expectations. The morning I told Daniel I was considering a divorce, he laughed. "You'll never leave me, Elizabeth. You need me too much." But he was wrong. I didn't need him. I hadn't needed him for a long time. What I needed was to find myself again, to break free from the chains of a loveless marriage, and so I began to plan my escape, my journey back to myself. It wouldn't be easy, but I was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, ready to be Elizabeth Hartman, not just Daniel's wife. The morning I decided to divorce Daniel was clear and bright, a stark contrast to the turmoil in my heart. As I looked at myself in the mirror, I saw a woman who had aged beyond her years, worn down by the relentless demands of a thankless marriage. But in my eyes, there was also a flicker of something new, determination. I sat at the kitchen table, the divorce papers in front of me. Daniel had left early, avoiding the confrontation. I signed my name with a steady hand, each stroke a line drawn in the sand, marking the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. The divorce process was grueling. Daniel fought me at every turn, unwilling to concede anything, but I stood my ground, fueled by years of suppressed anger and disappointment. In the end, the court granted me a fair settlement, not out of generosity, but out of legal obligation. I remember walking out of the courthouse, the weight of the past 40 years slowly lifting off my shoulders. I was free, but freedom came with its own set of challenges. I had to rebuild my life from scratch, find a place to live, and secure my financial future. I found a small apartment close to my workplace. It was modest, but it was mine. I decorated it with things I loved, each item a reflection of the new life I was building. I started to rediscover the simple joys I had long forgotten, reading a book uninterrupted, taking long walks, and meeting friends for coffee. But the biggest change was in how I saw myself. I was no longer just Daniel's wife, defined by my relationship to a man who had taken me for granted. I was Elizabeth Hartman, an independent woman with her own dreams and desires. As the months passed, I began to feel a sense of peace. The bitterness and anger that had consumed me slowly faded, replaced by a quiet strength. I had survived the worst and come out stronger. I occasionally heard snippets of Daniel's life after our divorce. He struggled to adjust to his new reality, the reality of a man who had lost the woman who had taken care of everything for him. But that was no longer my concern. My focus was on building a life that was fulfilling and joyful, a life that was truly mine. The journey was not easy. There were days when loneliness crept in, when the memories of the past threatened to overwhelm me. But I had learned to be resilient, to find happiness in the smallest things, and to cherish my independence. The divorce marked the end of my marriage to Daniel, but it was also the beginning of my journey to self-discovery. It was a journey of healing, of finding joy in solitude, and of learning to love myself. The first year after the divorce was a time of profound transformation for me. I had stepped out of the shadow of a stifling marriage and was learning to navigate the world on my own terms. Every day brought its challenges, but also its small victories and joys. My new apartment became a sanctuary, a place where I could be myself without judgment or expectation. I filled it with plants, their vibrant greens a stark contrast to the neutral tones of the home I had shared with Daniel. I took pleasure in caring for them, marveling at their growth and resilience, qualities I was beginning to see in myself. I also rediscovered old passions. I had always loved painting, a hobby I had set aside in the busy years of marriage and motherhood. Now I set up a small studio in a corner of my living room, and I spent my evenings lost in the world of colors and forms. It was therapeutic, a way to express the emotions that I had kept bottled up for so long. One of the most significant changes was in my social life. During my marriage, my world had revolved around Daniel and his needs. Now I reached out to old friends, rekindling relationships that had faded over the years. I also made new friends, people who knew me not as Daniel's wife but as Elizabeth Hartman, with my own stories and experiences. I joined a book club, finding delight in discussions that ranged far beyond the pages of the novels we read. I took a cooking class, laughing and learning with a group of strangers who quickly became friends. Each new experience was a step towards rebuilding my identity, piece by piece. Financial independence was another area where I thrived. I had received a fair settlement in the divorce, but I knew I couldn't rely on it forever. I took charge of my finances, learning about investment and savings. I was determined to secure my future, to never again be dependent on someone else for my financial well-being. But perhaps the most profound change was in my relationship with myself. For years, I had defined myself through my roles as a wife and mother. Now I began to see myself as an individual, with my own needs and desires. I learned to enjoy my own company, to cherish the solitude that had once frightened me. I remember one evening, sitting on my balcony, a cup of tea in my hand, watching the sunset. The sky was ablaze with oranges and pinks, a breathtaking canvas of nature's beauty. In that moment, I felt a deep sense of contentment, a peace I hadn't known in years. I had come a long way from the scared, uncertain woman who had signed those divorce papers. I had faced my fears, embraced change, and emerged stronger. I was no longer just surviving. I was thriving. In the second year after our divorce, news about Daniel began to trickle back to me through mutual acquaintances and unexpected encounters. It seemed that life, after having taken away so much from me, was now showing me a different side, one where karma played its hand. Daniel, who had once carried himself with an air of invincibility, was now a shadow of his former self. His relationship with the younger woman he had left me for had ended disastrously. She, unlike me, had little patience for his dismissive attitude and entitlement. I heard she left him for someone else, leaving Daniel alone and embittered. Financially, Daniel's situation had deteriorated rapidly. The savings he had once boasted about were dwindling. His habits of extravagant spending, which he indulged in during the early days of his newfound freedom, had caught up with him. Without me to manage the finances, he had fallen into debt. I remember feeling a mix of emotions when I first heard about his struggles. There was a part of me that felt vindicated, seeing him face the consequences of his actions, but there was also a sense of sadness, a mourning for the man I had once loved, who had lost his way so completely. Daniel's professional life, too, had taken a hit. His performance at work had suffered during the turmoil of his personal life. Rumors of his unprofessional behavior had spread, and soon he found himself without a job. The pride he had once taken in his career was now replaced by a sense of defeat and hopelessness. The house, which had been a bone of contention during our divorce, was now a burden to him. Without my upkeep, it had fallen into disrepair. The garden, which I had tended to with such care, was now overgrown and wild. The walls needed painting, the roof needed repairs, but Daniel lacked both the resources and the will to tend to them. Occasionally, I would drive past our old house, a pang of nostalgia hitting me as I saw the unkempt lawn and the peeling paint. It was a physical manifestation of Daniel's decline, a stark reminder of how far he had fallen. Despite everything, I found no joy in his misfortune. The years I had spent with him, the love I had once felt, made it impossible for me to completely harden my heart against him. But I also knew that this was his path to walk, his lessons to learn. I had my own journey to focus on, a journey of healing and self-discovery. Daniel's undoing was a stark reminder of how life can change, how the choices we make shape our destiny. It reinforced my resolve to live a life true to myself, a life where I was no longer a bystander, but the author of my own story. The third year after my divorce marked the beginning of a new chapter in my life, one filled with unexpected joys and the blossoming of new love. It was a time when the wounds of the past began to heal, and I allowed myself to embrace the possibilities of the future. I met John at a community art exhibition. He was a widower, a gentle man with a kind smile and an eye for beauty. Our love for art brought us together, and our conversations flowed effortlessly. He had a way of listening that made me feel heard, truly heard, for the first time in years. John, like me, had experienced loss and heartache. His wife had passed away after a long illness, leaving him to navigate the complexities of life alone. We found solace in each other's company, sharing stories of our pasts and dreams for our futures. Our relationship grew gradually, a slow and steady flame that warmed both our hearts. We spent our days exploring art galleries, attending concerts, and enjoying quiet dinners. With John, I rediscovered the joys of companionship, the simple pleasure of sharing life with someone who understood and appreciated me. The decision to remarry was not one I took lightly. The scars of my marriage with Daniel were still there, a reminder of the pain that love could bring. But with John, it felt different. There was a mutual respect and understanding, a shared desire to support and uplift each other. Our wedding was a small affair, just close friends and family. It was a celebration of new beginnings, a testament to the resilience of the human heart. As I stood beside John, exchanging vows, I felt a sense of wholeness, a feeling that I had come home. Life with John was peaceful and fulfilling. We moved into a new house, one that we chose together, filling it with memories and laughter. He encouraged my passion for painting, and I supported his love for gardening. Together we created a space that was a true reflection of our love. My daughter, Emily, saw the change in me. She was initially hesitant about John, protective of the mother who had been through so much. But as she saw the happiness he brought into my life, her reservations faded. She embraced John as a part of our family, and I watched their bond grow with a heart full of gratitude. John and I traveled, something I had always wanted to do, but never had the opportunity. We explored new places, immersing ourselves in different cultures and experiences. Each journey was an adventure, a chance to see the world through each other's eyes. As I lay in bed each night, John's steady breathing beside me, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. I had gone through the depths of despair, faced my fears, and emerged stronger. I had learned to love again, to open my heart to the possibilities of a new beginning. My life with John was a testament to the fact that it's never too late to find happiness, to start anew. It was a reminder that even after the darkest nights, the sun will rise, bringing with it the light of hope and the promise of a new day. As I sat on the porch of our home, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and pink, I reflected on the journey that had led me to this moment. Beside me, John held my hand gently, a silent symbol of the companionship and love that had become my new reality. The years following my marriage to John were like a balm to my soul. We had both found in each other a second chance at love, a chance to rewrite our stories with a happier ending. My life, once defined by the shadows of a loveless marriage, was now illuminated by the light of mutual respect and understanding. My relationship with my daughter Emily had blossomed as well. She had grown into a strong, independent woman, much like I had become. Our conversations, once cautious and superficial, were now deep and meaningful. She shared her life with me, her successes and her struggles, and I offered her the wisdom of my experiences, the lessons I had learned from my own journey. The joy of being a grandmother added another layer of happiness to my life. Emily's children, my grandchildren, were a source of endless delight. I saw in them the hope and promise of the future, a continuation of our family's legacy. John, with his kind nature, became a beloved figure in their lives, a testament to the fact that family is not just defined by blood, but by love and choice. Professionally, I had found fulfillment as well. I continued to work, but now on my terms. I pursued projects that interested me, that sparked my creativity and passion. My art, once a hobby pushed to the sidelines, was now a significant part of my life. I held exhibitions, sharing my work with a wider audience, receiving recognition for my talent and vision. In my moments of solitude, I often thought of Daniel. I heard through the grapevine that he lived a solitary life, his pride and choices leading him down a path of isolation. There was no joy in knowing this, only a sense of sadness for what might have been. I hoped that he, too, would find some peace, some lesson in the life he had chosen. As I looked ahead, I saw a future filled with possibilities. John and I had plans to travel, to explore, to experience all that life had to offer. We wanted to make the most of the time we had, to create memories that would last a lifetime. I had learned that life is a The phone rang just as I was about to sink into the couch with my favorite book. I glanced at the caller ID. Daniel. Sighing, I answered, "Hey, what's up?" "Laura, while you were away, I moved my parents' stuff in." Daniel's voice, casual and unapologetic, hit me like a thunderclap. "What do you mean?" My heart raced, and I sat upright, abandoning my book. "I told you we should have them live with us. They're here now." I felt the room spin. Daniel, we never agreed on this. How could you decide this alone while I'm visiting Uncle John? Daniel scoffed. Come on, Laura, it's not a big deal. Besides, I figured you wouldn't mind. Mind? The audacity of his assumption left me speechless. This house, our home, was suddenly invaded by his unilateral decision. Daniel, we need to talk about this. No need, just stay there a bit longer. Honestly, it might be better if you don't come back at all. His words stung, a cold dismissal that echoed in the now silent room. I had always known Daniel was headstrong, but this blatant disregard for our partnership, for me, was a new low. All right then, Daniel. If that's what you want, I replied, my voice steady, belying the storm inside. There was a pause, a moment of uncertainty. You're okay with this? Yes, Daniel. I guess it's time for me to move on anyway. The call ended abruptly, leaving me alone with my thoughts. For a moment, I let the hurt wash over me, the pain of being so easily discarded. But then, a flicker of resolve sparked within me. I remembered the plan Uncle John and I had discussed, a contingency for just such a betrayal. I reached for my phone again, my fingers deftly composing an email to a contact who could set our plan in motion. As I hit send, a sense of empowerment surged through me. Daniel thought he could easily upend my life, but I wasn't going to let him have the last word. The house we shared, it was more than just walls and a roof. It was the embodiment of my dreams, my efforts. Daniel might have believed he could just push me out, but he was in for a surprise. Uncle John's advice echoed in my mind. Always be 2 steps ahead, Laura. I started packing my things, each item a memory, a piece of the life I thought I had. But as I folded my clothes and gathered my belongings, I realized something. This wasn't the end. It was a new beginning. I was no longer the naive girl who fell for Daniel's charm. I was Laura, strong and capable, and I was about to show Daniel that underestimating me was his biggest mistake. I closed my suitcase, my heart steady and my mind clear. It was time to face what was coming, and I was ready. I left the house under the cover of dawn, the first light casting long shadows on the path that had once led me to a shared dream. As I drove away, my mind wandered back to the days before Daniel, before the disillusionment. I had always been a bit of a dreamer, finding solace in the quiet corners of life. Growing up in a modest home with loving parents, I learned early on the value of hard work and the joy of simple pleasures. My mother, a talented home cook, had instilled in me a love for nutrition and healthy living. Her sudden passing during my teenage years left a void, one that I filled by immersing myself in studies, eventually leading me to become a dietitian. College was a blur of textbooks and late-night study sessions, but it was at a college reunion that I met Daniel. He was charismatic, the life of the party, and when his eyes met mine, I felt a spark that I had never experienced before. Our whirlwind romance was like something out of a fairy tale, and before I knew it, I was walking down the aisle, promising to spend my life with him. Our early days of marriage were filled with laughter and love. Daniel, with his job in marketing, seemed to be the perfect counterpart to my more grounded nature. But as the years passed, the laughter faded, replaced by a growing sense of unease. Daniel's charm had masked a deeper, more unsettling trait, his obsession with status and wealth. His comments on my salary, once infrequent, became a constant refrain. "You'd think a dietitian would earn more," he'd say, a sneer in his voice. I brushed off these remarks, focusing instead on our son, Alex, who was growing into a thoughtful and intelligent young man. Alex, much like me, found his father's materialistic views troubling. He had ambitions of going to a top university, dreams that I wholeheartedly supported. Daniel, however, seemed more concerned with how Alex's choices would reflect on him rather than on what was best for our son. It was during one of our heated arguments about Alex's future that I realized how far Daniel and I had drifted apart. "He needs to aim for a prestigious college, Laura. It's about our family's reputation," Daniel insisted. "But it's Alex's future, Daniel. Shouldn't we support what he wants?" I countered, frustration evident in my voice. Daniel's dismissive attitude that night was a turning point for me. I knew then that something had to change, and so I found myself confiding in Uncle John, my mother's brother, and a wise confidant. It was he who helped me see the importance of standing up for myself and Alex. Together we devised a plan, a way to ensure that no matter what Daniel did, I would be able to protect my son and myself. As I drove towards Uncle John's house, the rising sun casting a warm glow over the horizon, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. This was not just a retreat. It was a step towards a future where I was no longer a bystander in my own life. It was time for Daniel to see that the quiet, unassuming Laura he thought he knew was gone. In her place was someone stronger, someone who wouldn't back down. Uncle John's home was a sanctuary, a place where I could gather my thoughts and plan my next steps. And over cups of steaming coffee, we sat at his old oak table, plotting. Uncle John, with his years of experience in law and a keen understanding of human nature, was the perfect ally. "You need to think about the long game, Laura," he advised, his eyes serious. "Daniel thinks he's outsmarted you, but we'll turn the tables on him." We discussed various strategies considering legal and financial aspects. Uncle John suggested transferring certain assets to my name and documenting all of Daniel's actions, should the situation escalate to legal proceedings. Throughout our discussions, my phone buzzed incessantly with messages from Daniel, ranging from dismissive to outright hostile. "You're overreacting, Laura. Just come back and we'll forget all this," read one. "You're being childish. Remember, I'm the one with the high-paying job," taunted another. I ignored them all, focusing instead on the plan. It wasn't just about getting back at Daniel. It was about securing a future for Alex and me. The thought of Alex brought a pang of guilt. He was preparing for his college entrance exams, and this upheaval was the last thing he needed. I called him, explaining as much as I could without burdening him further. "Mom, I get it. Dad's been different." Alex's voice was mature beyond his years. "Don't worry about me. I'm with Grandma and Grandpa. Focus on what you need to do." Hearing his words, I felt a mix of pride and sadness. My son was growing up in a broken home, yet he was showing more resilience and understanding than many adults. A few days turned into a week and then 2. Uncle John and I refined our strategy, ensuring every base was covered. We planned for the worst, but hoped for the best. The aim was to confront Daniel with a fait accompli, a situation where he had no choice but to acquiesce to our terms. Meanwhile, I kept up with work remotely, grateful for understanding colleagues and a flexible job. The normalcy of work was a welcome distraction, but every evening, as I sat in Uncle John's study, the reality of my situation sank in. Daniel, once the man I thought I would spend my life with, was now someone I barely recognized. His greed and selfishness had eroded the love I once felt, leaving in its wake a determination to protect what was rightfully mine, my dignity, my son's future, and my peace of mind. As I prepared to return to New York, I felt a sense of clarity. The path ahead would not be easy, but I was no longer the woman who left that house weeks ago. I was stronger, wiser, and ready to face whatever Daniel threw my way. The journey back to New York was a quiet one, filled with a mix of apprehension and resolve. The city's skyline, once a symbol of shared dreams and aspirations, now loomed like a battleground. As Uncle John drove, his steady presence was a reassuring reminder that I wasn't alone in this fight. The plan was simple, yet bold. We would confront Daniel with the reality of his actions and the consequences that awaited him. Uncle John had already laid the groundwork, consulting with legal experts and ensuring that everything was in place for a seamless execution. Upon arriving home, the sight of moving boxes and unfamiliar cars parked outside was jarring. Daniel's parents, unaware of the impending storm, greeted me with polite smiles. "Laura, it's good to have you back," Daniel's mother said, a hint of unease in her voice. Daniel, however, was nowhere to be seen. His absence was both a relief and a frustration. I needed to face him, to look him in the eye and let him know that his days of controlling our lives were over. The house felt different, as if it had lost its warmth. Daniel's parents had made themselves comfortable, but the atmosphere was tense, a silent acknowledgement of the unspoken conflict. I retreated to my room, the same room where I had packed my bags weeks ago. It felt like a lifetime had passed since then. I unpacked my suitcase, each item a symbol of the new life I was carving out for myself and Alex. That evening, as I sat at the dinner table with Daniel's parents, the conversation was strained. They spoke of Daniel in glowing terms, oblivious to his manipulative ways. I nodded and smiled, keeping my true feelings hidden. The time for revelations was not yet here. Later that night, Daniel finally returned. He was surprised to see me, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. "Laura, you're back," he said, his tone a mix of surprise and annoyance. "Yes, Daniel, we need to talk," I replied, my voice calm but firm. He scoffed. "What's there to talk about? You left, remember?" I stood my ground. "It's about the house, Daniel, and our future." Daniel laughed, a hollow sound that echoed in the empty room. "What about it? You think you can just come back and everything will be as it was?" "No, Daniel, things will never be the same, but you need to understand something. This house, it's not just yours to decide on." His expression changed, a hint of worry creeping in. "What do you mean?" I took a deep breath, ready to lay out the reality he was about to face. "This house, it's in my name too, and I've been talking to a lawyer. We have options, Daniel, and none of them look good for you." For a moment, Daniel was speechless. The confident, controlling man I had known was gone, replaced by someone who realized he was no longer in control. "This is just the beginning, Daniel. You thought you could push me out, make decisions without me. But I'm not the same person you thought you could manipulate. I'm fighting back, for me and for Alex." Daniel's face hardened, the reality of the situation setting in. "You can't do this, Laura. I won't let you." But I was resolute. "It's already done, Daniel. You've made your choices, and now you have to live with them." As I left him standing there, a mix of anger and disbelief on his face, I knew that the hardest part was yet to come. But I was ready to reclaim my life, my dignity, and my son's future. The following days were a whirlwind of activity and tense exchanges. Daniel oscillated between anger, disbelief, and desperate attempts to regain control. But with Uncle John's guidance and my newfound resolve, I navigated each challenge with a clarity I never knew I possessed. Daniel's parents, caught in the middle, were a source of unexpected sympathy. His mother, particularly, seemed to sense the gravity of the situation. "Laura, I never realized things were this bad between you two," she confided one afternoon, her eyes filled with concern. "It's been building up for a while," I admitted, finding solace in her understanding. Our conversation was a reminder that Daniel's actions affected more than just us. As the day of reckoning approached, I prepared myself for the final confrontation. Uncle John had arranged for a meeting with Daniel, his parents, and our respective lawyers. The goal was to settle matters as amicably as possible, given the circumstances. The meeting was held in a neutral location, a stark conference room that mirrored the cold reality of our situation. Daniel was already there when I arrived, his posture rigid, his face a mask of defiance. "Let's just get this over with," he muttered as I took my seat opposite him. The lawyers laid out the facts. The house, purchased with contributions from both of our families, was legally co-owned. Daniel's unilateral decisions and his recent behavior had put him in a precarious legal position. As the reality of his situation dawned on him, Daniel's facade began to crumble. He looked at me, a mix of anger and desperation in his eyes. "Laura, please. We can work this out. Just come back home." But the home he spoke of no longer existed, not for me. "Daniel, you made your choices. Now I'm making mine. It's over." The negotiations were tense but straightforward. We agreed to sell the house and divide the proceeds. Daniel's parents would move to a smaller place, and I would start afresh, somewhere new, somewhere where the shadows of the past couldn't reach. As the meeting concluded, Daniel's mother approached me, her eyes moist with unshed tears. "I'm sorry, Laura. I'm sorry for everything." I hugged her, a gesture of mutual forgiveness and understanding. "Take care of yourself," I whispered. Leaving the conference room, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The battle was over, and though the road ahead was uncertain, I was free. Free from Daniel's control, free to build a new life for Alex and myself. The drive back to Uncle John's house was a quiet one. I looked out the window, the city passing by in a blur. I thought of Alex, of the bright future he had ahead of him, and of the new chapter I was about to begin. Uncle John broke the silence. "You did well, Laura. I'm proud of you. Thank you, Uncle John, for everything." As we drove on, the sun began to set, casting a warm golden light over the city. It felt like a promise of new beginnings and brighter days ahead. Months had passed since the day I walked away from that conference room, away from a life that was no longer mine. With each passing day, the sense of liberation and self-discovery grew stronger. I was rebuilding my life, piece by piece, on my own terms. The house sold quicker than we had anticipated. With my share of the proceeds, I bought a quaint apartment in a quiet neighborhood, a place where Alex and I could start anew. The walls were adorned with memories, both old and new, each telling the story of our journey. Alex had excelled in his exams, earning a place at his desired university. His resilience and determination were a source of immense pride. We often talked about his future, his dreams, and I saw in his eyes the same hope and ambition that had driven me through my darkest days. I found solace in my work, diving into community nutrition programs and workshops. My experiences had ignited a passion for helping others, for sharing the lessons I had learned about self-care and resilience. Occasionally, I heard news about Daniel through mutual acquaintances. He had moved into a smaller place. His lifestyle drastically changed. There was no joy in hearing of his struggles, only a quiet acknowledgement that the choices we make shape our lives. Uncle John remained a pillar of support, his wisdom and guidance a constant in my life. We often met for coffee, discussing everything from politics to philosophy. He had been more than just a mentor through my ordeal. He had become a true friend. As I sat in my new living room, the evening sun casting a warm glow through the window, I reflected on the journey I had been through. The pain, the betrayal, the fight for my rights, it had all led me to this moment, a moment of peace and contentment. I had learned that strength comes not from what we endure, but from how we rise above it. I had faced my fears, stood up for myself and my son, and in doing so, had found a sense of purpose and self-worth that no one could take away. The phone rang, jolting me from my thoughts. It was Alex, his voice bright and full of excitement. "Mom, I got an internship. It's exactly what I was hoping for." I smiled, my heart swelling with pride. "That's wonderful, Alex. I'm so proud of you." As we chatted, I realized this was what true happiness felt like. It wasn't about a perfect life. It was about a life lived with integrity, resilience, and love. The chapter with Daniel had closed, but a new one was just beginning. A chapter filled with hope, possibilities, and the promise of a future crafted by our own hands. And so, as the sun set, casting long shadows across the room, I knew that no matter what the future held, Alex and I would face it together, stronger and wiser than ever before. I stood in the middle of the kitchen, the cold tile beneath my feet feeling like ice against my skin. "Anna, did you even hear me?" Mrs. Thompson's voice was sharp, a knife slicing through the tense air. I turned, meeting her stern gaze. "I heard you, Mrs. Thompson. You want fish for dinner." "And not just any fish," she insisted, her eyes narrowing. "Get tuna, the fresh kind. Lily loves it." As if on cue, Lily, my 16-year-old stepdaughter, strutted into the kitchen, her phone glued to her ear. She barely acknowledged my presence, her eyes rolling dramatically. Fish again? I want a burger. Go get me one, Anna." The demands weren't new, but they stung each time. I was more a servant than a family member in this house. A deep breath steadied my voice. "But I'm already preparing dinner." Lily cut me off. "So I want a burger. Can't you do that one little thing for me?" Mrs. Thompson chimed in, her voice laced with feigned concern. "She's just a kid who wants a burger, Anna. It's not about being stingy." The word stingy hung in the air, a label I'd become too familiar with in this household. They had no idea about the financial tightrope we were walking on. My job in administration barely covered the essentials, and Michael's sporadic earnings as a struggling writer added little. "Fine, I'll get the burger," I muttered, feeling a familiar knot of frustration in my stomach. As I turned to leave, Lily's voice stopped me. And I need $100. I spun around, disbelief written across my face. $100? For what? There's this new game everyone has. I need it. I looked towards Mrs. Thompson, hoping for some semblance of reason. Instead, she nodded in agreement. Poor thing. She needs to fit in with her friends. Give her the money, Anna. But this month's budget is already stretched thin, I protested weakly. Mrs. Thompson's expression hardened. Are you suggesting we're not entitled to Michael's royalties? What kind of stepmother are you? A stepmother trying to keep us afloat, I wanted to say. But the words never came. Instead, I reached for my purse, the weight of their expectations heavier than the coins and notes it contained. The evening air was crisp as I returned from the store, bags weighing down my arms. Inside them, a symbol of my surrender, a tuna and a burger. As I entered the house, the scent of disdain was more pungent than the food's aroma. Finally, Lily scoffed, snatching the bag with the burger. Took you long enough? I set the tuna on the kitchen counter, meeting Mrs. Thompson's scrutinizing gaze. Here's the fish, Mrs. Thompson. She inspected it with a frown. It could be fresher. Next time, put in more effort, Anna. I nodded, a lump forming in my throat. Michael was in his study, probably lost in his world of make-believe literary fame. I longed for him to see the reality, our dwindling savings, the mounting bills, and his family's insatiable demands. Later that night I lay in bed, the moon casting shadows across the room. Michael's voice broke the silence. Anna, you seem distant lately. Is everything okay? I turned to face him, the moonlight revealing his oblivious expression. It's just your family, and our finances. It's overwhelming. He brushed off my concerns with a wave of his hand. Don't worry about money. Writers don't. It stifles creativity. And my family, well, they're just set in their ways. But Michael, the reality is... I started, but he interrupted. Reality is subjective. In my world, my next novel will be a bestseller. You'll see. I wanted to scream, to shake him into seeing the truth. But I bit my tongue, a tear escaping down my cheek. I turned away, the unsaid words festering in my heart. The next morning, Lily's taunts and Mrs. Thompson's criticisms resumed. As I prepared breakfast, I overheard Lily talking to her friend on the phone. She's so pathetic, pretending to be our mom. I wish Dad would just divorce her already. The words pierced through me like icy daggers. I wanted to confront her, to defend myself, but I remained silent, my hands trembling as I poured the coffee. At work, my colleague Jane noticed my forlorn expression. Anna, you okay? You've seemed off lately. I sighed, the dam of my emotions ready to burst. It's just home stuff, you know how it is. Jane leaned in, her voice a whisper. If it's that bad, maybe it's time to think about yourself. You deserve happiness too, you know. Just her words echoed in my mind all day. Happiness, a distant dream smothered by the burden of illusions I was living under. The world outside was bathed in a soft, golden hue of the setting sun, but inside, the walls of the house felt like they were closing in on me. It had been another day of juggling insults and managing the impossible demands of my stepfamily. As I entered the living room, the sight that greeted me stopped me dead in my tracks. Half of the furniture was gone. The room, once cluttered with Mrs. Thompson's countless knickknacks and Lily's gadgets, was now eerily empty. A cold dread settled in my stomach. I reached for my phone, dialing Michael's number. It rang and rang, until finally his voice came through, distant and cold. Anna, you noticed, huh? What's going on, Michael? Where is everything? His laugh was hollow. We've moved, Anna, to a high-rise condo. A fresh start, you know? My heart pounded in my chest. A fresh start? Without me? You can join us if you want, but you'll need to apologize first. Apologize? For what? Keeping us from bankruptcy? For enduring their endless ridicule? In the background, I could hear Lily's voice, laced with malice. She finally realized she's not wanted. Good riddance. Mrs. Thompson's voice joined the chorus. Michael deserves better. Someone who appreciates his talent. Their words were like venom, and with each syllable, the last threads of my attachment to this family frayed and snapped. Michael, I said, my voice steady, I won't be joining you. I hope you find what you're looking for in your new condo. There was a pause, and then a scoff. How noble of you, Anna. The call ended, leaving me in a silence that was both suffocating and liberating. The next few days were a blur. I packed my belongings, each item a reminder of a life filled with false hopes and unreciprocated love. The divorce papers arrived soon after, with Michael's signature scrawled across them. As I signed them, a sense of freedom washed over me. This was the point of no return. I was leaving behind the life of a woman scorned and stepping into a future where my worth wasn't tied to the whims of a family that never saw me as one of their own. I left the house for the last time, the divorce papers in my bag. The world outside seemed different now, brighter, full of possibilities. I was no longer Anna, the unwanted stepmother. I was just Anna, and that was enough. The first morning in my new apartment greeted me with a quiet that was both unfamiliar and comforting. Sunlight streamed through the windows, casting a warm glow on the sparse yet cozy space I now called home. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of peace. Sitting at my small dining table, I sipped my coffee and reflected on the whirlwind of changes. I had left behind the toxic environment of my previous life, and, with it, the shadows that had clung to my spirit. Now it was just me, my thoughts, and the blank pages of a notebook that lay open in front of me. Writing had always been a secret passion of mine, a hidden outlet for my emotions. But in the chaos of my life with Michael and his family, it had been pushed aside, forgotten. Now the words flowed effortlessly, as if they had been waiting just beneath the surface, eager to be released. As days turned into weeks, I found solace in my newfound freedom and the routine I had established. My job in administration, once a source of stress, now felt manageable, even enjoyable. But it was in the evenings, when I returned to my writing, that I felt truly alive. I wrote about everything, my feelings, my experiences, and even fictional stories that mirrored the journey I had been on. Each word was a step away from my past and a step towards rediscovering who I was. It wasn't long before I decided to take a leap of faith. I submitted some of my work to various publications and writing contests. To my surprise and delight, the response was overwhelmingly positive. My stories resonated with readers, and I began to receive offers for freelance writing jobs. One evening, as I was finishing up a piece, my phone rang. It was Jane, my colleague. "Anna, you won't believe it. Your story won first place in the local writing competition. They loved it." I was speechless. This was more than just a win. It was validation of my talent and my journey. As weeks turned into months, my life settled into a pleasant rhythm. I was no longer just surviving. I was thriving. My relationship with Michael and his family became a distant memory, a chapter of my life that was closed and tucked away. But life has a way of bringing the past back, just when you think you've moved on. It was on a crisp autumn day that I received a call from Michael. His voice, once so familiar, now sounded like a distant echo from another life. "Anna, we need to talk." I hesitated for a moment, the old wounds still tender. But I was not the same woman he had left behind. I was stronger, more resilient. "All right, Michael, let's talk." The coffee shop was bustling with the late afternoon crowd, but the noise faded into the background as I saw Michael sitting at a corner table. He looked older, warier, a shadow of the man I once knew. "Anna, thank you for meeting me," he said, his voice tinged with a desperation I hadn't heard before. I sat down, keeping my expression neutral. "What did you want to talk about, Michael?" He hesitated, fidgeting with his coffee cup. "It's about the condo and everything, really." "We're in trouble, Anna." I listened, my heart void of the sympathy I once would have felt. Michael spoke of financial woes, the high-rise dream turning into a nightmare of debts and disillusionment. Lily and Mrs. Thompson, once so demanding, were now facing the harsh reality of their situation. I thought my writing would save us, but... Michael's voice trailed off, his eyes not meeting mine. The irony wasn't lost on me. The man who had dismissed my concerns about money was now drowning in the very thing he had ignored. "Michael, I'm sorry to hear that, but why tell me this? We're divorced. Your financial problems aren't mine anymore." He looked up, a flicker of hope in his eyes. "I was hoping maybe you could help us, just until I get back on my feet." The request was absurd, almost laughable. "Help you? After everything that's happened?" Michael leaned in, his voice low. "You were always good with money, Anna, and you've always been kind-hearted." Kind-hearted. The term felt like a slap. I had been kind-hearted, and it had been taken for granted, exploited. "Michael, I've moved on. I have my own life now, my own expenses. I can't help you." His face fell, the reality of my words sinking in. "I see. I just thought." What did you think, Michael? That I'd come running back to fix the mess you've created? He didn't respond, the silence between us growing heavier by the second. Finally, I stood up. I wish you the best, Michael. I truly do, but your life is no longer my concern. As I walked away, leaving Michael in the coffee shop, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. It was the final closure I needed. The last remnants of a life I no longer belonged to had been shed. The crisp autumn air was a refreshing contrast to the warmth of my apartment. As I sat at my desk, the glow of the computer screen illuminated the room. It had been a few months since my last encounter with Michael, and life had settled into a comforting rhythm of work and writing. My phone buzzed, breaking the silence. It was a call from Jane. "Anna, you won't believe this. Your novel is being considered for a movie adaptation." I was stunned. My novel, born from the pain and turmoil of my past, had not only resonated with readers, but had also caught the attention of a film producer. It felt surreal, like a dream I was afraid to wake up from. "Are you serious, Jane? That's incredible." Her excitement mirrored mine. "I told you, Anna, you're a fantastic writer. This is just the beginning." As I ended the call, a profound sense of accomplishment washed over me. My journey, with all its hardships, had led me to this moment. In the weeks that followed, negotiations for the movie adaptation progressed rapidly. My novel, which detailed the struggles of a woman finding her strength amidst adversity, was going to be on the big screen. One evening, as I was reflecting on these developments, a news alert popped up on my phone. It was about Michael. Curiosity piqued. I clicked on the link. The article detailed Michael's latest misfortune. His attempts at writing had finally come to a futile end. Publishers had lost interest, citing his lack of originality and poor sales. To add to his woes, his high-rise dream had crumbled. Unable to keep up with the rent and mounting debts, he and his family had been forced to move out. I read the article with a mix of emotions. There was no joy in seeing someone's life unravel, but there was a sense of poetic justice. Michael and his family, who had once looked down on me, were now facing the consequences of their actions and choices. As I turned off my phone, I realized that this was the true essence of karma. It wasn't about revenge or seeing others suffer. It was about the natural balance of life where actions and choices inevitably shaped one's destiny. I turned back to my writing, the words flowing freely. My experiences had taught me that strength comes from within, and that resilience is born from adversity. And now I was sharing those lessons with the world. My past with Michael and his family was a closed chapter, but it had given me the greatest gift, the realization of my own potential and the courage to pursue my dreams. As the moon cast a gentle light through my window, I smiled to myself. Life was unpredictable, filled with ups and downs, but I was ready for whatever came next. I had found my voice, my purpose, and no one could take that away from me. I hesitated for just a second before picking up the phone, already bracing myself for another unpleasant exchange. Paul often called me at the worst possible times, but this time was different. The lines of worry etched across my face deepened as I answered. "What is it now, Paul?" "I hate to break it to you, but my girlfriend is pregnant." His voice was flat, emotionless. "She's 18 years younger than me. I guess what I'm saying is, I'm leaving you, Anna. Getting a divorce. That's cool with you, right?" I gripped the phone tighter, the edges digging into my palm. My other hand involuntarily clenched into a fist, an outward display of the inner turmoil I was struggling to suppress. After years of tension and disappointment, I should have been prepared for something like this. But the sheer audacity of his request left me momentarily speechless. Before I could formulate a response, my thoughts were interrupted by a more pressing concern: the well-being of our son, or rather my stepson, Sam. At 16, he would be far from oblivious to the goings-on in our suddenly fractured household. He had always been a sensitive kid, finely attuned to the fault lines of our family. As if on cue, a soft knocking came from the door of the study, the only room I considered mine in the sprawling house that Paul and I shared. "Mom, is everything all right?" It was Sam's voice, tinged with the worry that I had come to recognize all too well. Momentarily neglecting Paul, who was still droning on about something or another, I softened my voice and replied, "I'll be out in a minute, sweetie. Just wrapping up a call." Turning back to the matter at hand, I found my voice. "Listen, Paul, We'll discuss the divorce later. What's most important now is Samantha. If we're going through with this, you need to take responsibility for him. For now, please just let this settle before you do anything else rash." There was a pause on the other end, and then an exasperated sigh. "Anna, don't start with this. He's your kid too." Technically, he was right, but the unpleasant truth, and perhaps my most powerful card, was still tucked tightly against my chest, a reminder of the complex emotional and legal dynamics that had bound our little family together. The silence on my end seemed to unnerve him, and he blurted out, "You know what? Fine, we'll talk about this later." And with that, he hung up. Releasing a sigh I hadn't realized I was holding, I placed the phone down and pinched the bridge of my nose, an ineffectual attempt to fend off the headache brewing just beneath the surface. Sam was waiting just outside the door when I emerged, his eyes searching mine for an explanation I wasn't yet ready to provide. I mustered a reassuring smile and looped an arm around his shoulders, guiding him back to the living room. "Let's not worry about that call," I said, although we both knew that was a near impossibility. "Why don't you tell me about your day instead?" And as he launched into a story about his latest project in art class, I clung to the normalcy of our conversation like a lifeline, knowing full well that the storm clouds were gathering just beyond the horizon. That night, as the house lay quiet and shadows played against the walls from the street lamps outside, my mind began to drift back in time. The memories came unbidden, a cascade of moments revealing a completely different version of the man I had married. I settled into my armchair, a relic from my pre-Paul days, and let the past unravel itself. I was 27 when I met Paul, an independent marketing expert with a penchant for brand revival. He came to me as a client, but soon became more. We were both rebounding from past relationships. Mine was a tale of young love that burned out too brightly, and his was a marriage wrecked by infidelity. It didn't take long for Paul to sweep me into a whirlwind romance, complete with tender looks and promises of always putting family first. His son, whom he had full custody of, was named Sam. At the tender age of 3, the boy had a mop of curly hair and eyes so wide they seemed to swallow the world around him. Paul would bring him along on our dates, saying, "Just until we find a good sitter." But as time went by, it became an unspoken arrangement, one that didn't bother me as much as I thought it might. Despite my initial reservations, there were fleeting moments where our trio felt like a glimpse of the family life I'd never known I wanted. It was both cozy and exciting, and I began to think that perhaps I could step into this role that the universe had seemingly carved out just for me. So when Paul proposed a year into our relationship, presenting not only a ring but a family unit, I said yes, with hardly a second thought. But the rosy glow of new marriage faded with startling rapidity. As soon as our honeymoon was over, literally and metaphorically, the real Paul began to surface. His facade of a doting father cracked and fell away, leaving behind a man who seemed increasingly indifferent to his son's existence. Work was always his convenient excuse. Even when the underlying note of sadness in Sam's voice couldn't be missed, Paul would shrug it off, leaving me to soothe away the sting of abandonment. I tried to voice my concerns, but Paul's temper flared up easily. "It's not your place," he would say, dismissing my attempts to navigate a healthy dynamic between father and son. As time wore on, I tried to be everything Sam needed, steadfast and present, unlike his father. I attended school plays alone, cheering twice as loud to make up for the space where Paul should have been. And with every small absence, with every unkept promise, a bitter seed of resentment took root in my heart. Now, in the subdued light of my living room, as sleep teased at the edges of my consciousness, I couldn't help but wonder when exactly my marriage had slipped from being a partnership to a performance, and at what point I had lost myself in this charade of family life. The morning sun filtered through the blinds, casting lines of light and shadow across my face. I took a moment to steel myself for whatever trials the day might bring, after last night's revelations. The silence of the house was a stark contrast to the chaos of my thoughts. Sam was still asleep, his door ajar and his breathing steady. I let out a quiet sigh of relief that he could at least find some peace during these turbulent times. The urge to protect him from the incoming storm was visceral, but I could not hide forever behind a facade of calm domesticity. Hesitantly, I revisited the idea of returning to work, part-time at least. It wasn't just about the money, although our family's financial future was uncertain with the looming divorce. It was about regaining a semblance of the independence I had once taken for granted. I remembered my conversation with Paul about this a few years back. A part-time job? Paul had scoffed, slouched on the couch with a beer in hand. What's that for? Some pocket money for shopping? His laughter still echoed in my mind, a bitter reminder of his condescension. It's for Sam. I had shot back, my voice firm. He's growing up, and there are expenses, school supplies, extracurricular activities, and I want to help. Paul's only response had been a shrug before he dimmed the room with the TV's glow. But the next morning, when his head was clearer, he had grudgingly agreed, tossing the declaration at me like it was a breadcrumb. And so I slipped back into a familiar role in the marketing world, but on my own terms. My former boss had welcomed me back with open arms, aware of the tumultuous tide I was navigating at home. The balancing act was taxing, juggling domestic duties with the demands of work, but it provided a lifeline. A reminder that I was more than just someone's cast-off wife. It felt invigorating to reclaim a piece of my identity. That liberation was cut short one evening when my work commitments saw me arriving home later than usual to find Paul pacing in the foyer, a snarl twisting his lips. "Where have you been?" he demanded. "I was at my part-time job," I replied, weary and not in the mood for another confrontation. "Meeting some man, right?" He seized my arm, his fingers biting into my skin. "Is that it, Anna? Tell me!" The absurd accusation struck me like a slap. Paul's distrust was a grotesque mirror that reflected his infidelities, not mine. I wrenched my arm away from his grip, denial falling from my lips in heated, vehement waves. But Paul, never one to back down, demanded to see my phone, to delve into the intricacies of a life he so often shunned. I watched frozen as he dialed my boss's number, that single action shattering any facade of trust we might have still shared. I could have drowned in the silence that followed my boss's clear-cut clarification. Paul's lame attempt at an excuse was nothing more than a shrug and a suggestion that I should have been more careful, if only to save him the embarrassment. Since then, my days were colored with a rising dread of future altercations, a dread that had seeped steadily into my heart, setting up residence alongside the growing hollow of my love for Paul. Now, as I sat upright in my armchair, a cup of cold coffee abandoned on the table before me, the inevitability of our situation settled heavily upon my shoulders. We were past the point of repair. The notion of us existed now only in the fragmented memories of a time when I believed in the possibility of a happy ending. As the days slipped by in an unsettled quiet, life took on a stuttering rhythm. I tried to protect Sam from the growing tensions while I navigated the minefield that my marriage had become. I felt a cold knot at the pit of my stomach every time I caught sight of Paul's car parked outside, his comings and goings now as erratic as his moods. One afternoon, my work took me near Paul's corporate office, a swanky high-rise that seemed to scrape the clouds. A familiar prickling discomfort grew within me as I walked by. Even after all these years, I had never quite come to consider that towering glass monolith as a part of my world. It was Paul's territory, a place where I had little reason or desire to venture until now. As fate would have it, I caught sight of Paul's car parked across the street. There was a figure seated beside him, unmistakable by its youthfulness and the animated gestures that accompanied a fit of laughter between them. With a heavy heart, I realized this must be the younger girlfriend, the one carrying his child. My hands shook with a volatile mix of anger and anxiety as I snapped a picture. I didn't know what I intended to do with it, but the private investigator my friend had mentioned once seemed like a good place to start. Secrecy wasn't something with which I was comfortable, yet the situation seemed to call for it. As the evidence of Paul's duplicity gathered in the hands of the PI, a morbid sense of satisfaction intermingled with my pain. It was ironic how the truth often surfaces when one starts digging in the right places. At home, Sam's obliviousness was a mercy and a curse. The moments we shared, him asking for help with his college applications or discussing his art projects, were pockets of normalcy that kept me anchored. Yet the looming specter of the truth felt heavier by the day. How long could I keep this all from him, and when the time came, how would he view his father, or me? Paul seemed oblivious to the undercurrents, too consumed by his extramarital escapades to notice, or perhaps he simply didn't care. Our interactions were stilted, and more often than not, he wore an expression of annoyance that would crescendo into aggression if pressed. It was during one of these strained conversations that the dam finally broke. Clutching the preliminary report from the PI, I let my gaze harden when I addressed him. "I don't know which is worse," I started, the frost in my voice matching the icy glare I fixed on him. "The fact that you're cheating, or that you were so sloppy about hiding it." Paul's reaction was a bizarre blend of shock and defiance. "What are you talking about, Anna?" "I'm talking about your barely legal mistress and the baby that you claim is yours." I pushed the paper across the table, watching as his eyes darted over the incriminating photos and the sterile, typed-up accounts of his infidelity. The room went dead silent for a second too long before I eventually added, "You're going to need to take better care of Sam. He's your responsibility, Paul." "You can't mean that," Paul retorted weakly. "What about everything we've been through?" I mustered the full force of my resolve when I addressed him, the cut of betrayal slicing through each word. "Because, Paul, as much as I love Sam, I've never legally adopted him. He's not my child, he's yours with your ex-wife." Paul's stunned silence was answer enough. The truth hung between us an unscalable wall. It was a final acknowledgement of a relationship that had been fraying at the seams long before his affair. In the quiet aftermath, I slipped silently out of the room and made my way to the one place I now considered an asylum, Sam's room. His earnest smile and oblivious chatter were the only consolation I had left in the ever-complicating mess of my married life. Sitting at the kitchen table the next morning, I sipped my tea, staring at the steam curling upwards like wistful spirits seeking escape from their liquid confines. The house was too quiet, the kind of silence that seems to press against your ears. A silence ripe with words not yet spoken, truths not yet revealed. There was a knock at the door, solemn and perfunctory. It was Paul, his face a grim mask of confrontation, his jaw twitching with pent-up frustration. In tow was Emma, the young woman whose involvement with my husband had upended my life. Her belly was now showing the early signs of pregnancy, and she moved with the tentative touch of someone navigating new terrain. "Anna," Paul began, "we need to talk." The frigid air between us crackled with tension as I remained silent, nodding slightly for him to continue. With hesitant boldness, Emma spoke up. "I've heard a lot about you. And Sam. He's a good kid, right? You've been parenting him for over a decade." "Indeed," I replied coolly. "Sam is a remarkable young man." "Then why abandon him now?" Emma's voice wavered slightly, betraying her underlying apprehension. The question stung, but I kept my composure. "It's not a matter of want, Emma. Legally speaking, he is not my child." I could see the confusion in her eyes, her furtive glances at Paul searching for reassurance or explanation. Paul, seemingly prepared for a different outcome, appeared lost. "But we're married, Anna. Isn't that enough?" "No, it's not," I said firmly. "To make a stepchild one's own, one must legally adopt them. I never did." "Adoption?" Emma frowned, the concept foreign to her. "Exactly," I continued. "Without that, I have no claim over Sam, no obligations or rights." Paul's face paled. "What does this mean for us, then?" "It means you're fully responsible for Sam's upbringing. I am not abandoning him, but I cannot, in good legal conscience, take him with me. Your actions have consequences, Paul." There was a pause as the weight of my words settled over us like a shroud. "Look, this is a mess," I concluded, standing up. "I'm willing to discuss a fair divorce settlement, but Sam's care is not negotiable. He's your son." The conversation ended with Paul's defeatist surrender. Emma's protests were cut short by a simple, yet stern look. They left in a huff, the door closing behind them with a decisive click, the sound echoing the closing chapter of our marriage. It was only after their car was out of sight that I allowed myself a single solitary tear. My grief was not for the loss of Paul, already a ghost in my heart, but for the upheaval that Sam's life was about to undergo. I vowed then and there to protect him as much as I could, no matter the legal ties that bound or separated us. Days passed in a haze of legal consultations and muted emotions. I navigated through them with the determination of someone who knows there's no turning back. Every ring of the phone, every knock on the door, I was braced for another battle, another bitter exchange. In a strange turn of the tide, Paul's inevitable retaliation came not in the form of tantrums or threats, but with him dragging Emma into the sanctity of our home. The tension was thick, a tangible entity as they stood there, a united but unstable front. "Anna," Paul began, urgency bordering on desperation clouding his voice. "You can't just back out and let everything fall apart because our situation changed." I could only nod, urging him to continue while mentally preparing my counter-argument. I was not going to be swayed by emotional pleas or twisted logic. Emma, her arms protectively cradling her unborn future, found her voice amidst the unease. "Surely there's a way you can keep Sam. You were his mother for so long." Her words hung in the air, and I felt a pang of sympathy for her, caught in the crossfire of our crumbling marriage. "Emma, I did not abandon Sam. Paul did when he chose to pursue a relationship outside of our marriage. One cannot just discard responsibilities because it's inconvenient," I replied, my voice even but firm. "The legality of my relationship with Sam is clear. No formal adoption, no parental rights. It's always been that way." The confusion in Emma's eyes mirrored the same dawning realization I saw in Paul's. It was then I decided to divulge the final nail in their contrived coffin. I retrieved the folder containing the evidence of Emma's infidelity, the product of the private investigator's thorough work. Her breath hitched audibly as she scanned the photos and accompanying reports. "This child," I began, placing an incriminating photo of Emma with a man not Paul on the table. "It doesn't belong to you, does it, Paul?" Silence consumed the room as Paul's gaze fixated on the photograph, slowly twisting from confusion to anger. He rounded on Emma with glaring accusation. "Is this true?" His voice was barely above a whisper, but each word was laced with betrayal. Emma's stammered denial, negated by the evidence before her eyes, only fueled Paul's fury. You led me on." Paul's words were venomous, his expression an amalgam of rage and hurt. Observing the scene unfold with a detached, academic interest, I felt the chains of my marriage finally slacken. "Do what you must with each other. Sam and I will adapt, as we always have. I expect you'll do the same," I uttered with finality, excusing myself from the brewing storm. As I made my way to the haven of my study, their heated exchanges muffled by the closed door, I focused on the sound of my steady breaths and the knowledge that Sam and I would face brighter days ahead. It was not the end of our story, merely the beginning of a new chapter. In the wake of the crumbling illusions and the raw truths laid bare, my thoughts turned toward the future with a steely resolve. It was within the confines of my study, among the legal pads scribbled with thoughts and potential strategies, that I formulated my next steps. A decisive course of action was necessary, both for Sam's well-being and for my emancipation from the life I had known. I reached out to my attorney, a meticulous and forthright woman named Miss Carter, who had been a guardian angel of sorts throughout this ordeal. "It's time to discuss the terms of the divorce and the division of property," I told her over a secure line, each word a hammer driving nails into the coffin of my marriage. Miss Carter assured me she would arrange for us to move forward with pragmatic efficiency, and I trusted her implicitly. Preparing for this legal battle was like bracing for a storm. Security measures were a necessity, not a luxury. Within days, a meeting was orchestrated to discuss the partition of our lives into neatly quantifiable assets and liabilities. Paul's disposition fluctuated between anger and spiteful acquiescence. But through it all, I remained firmly anchored to my objectives. As if play-acting the part of the dutiful wife one last time, I served coffee and brought out the ledger of our once-shared existence, slipping into the uncomfortable but familiar role of his domestic partner. Trying to eke out my dignity from our divide was akin to navigating a boat through rocky shoals, each potential compromise on material possessions a risk that might capsize an already unstable situation. But Sam's future was the lighthouse guiding me. Everything I did was to ensure he would not be left adrift in the wake of our split. Paul hesitated, his expression a mask of consternation as we discussed alimony and the financial stipulations going forward. "How can we possibly unwind everything we've built?" he asked, a note of plea underlying his usual assertiveness. "We can, and we will," I assured him, my tone laced with an undercurrent of fatigue. "It's not just about us anymore." The air grew colder, the silence starker, as we both signed the papers that would render our shared history into nothing more than a transaction, an exchange of worldly goods and bruised promises. I hesitated only once, my pen hovering over the document as the finality of it all settled into my bones. Each stroke of my signature was a release, a liberation from the ties that no longer served me, or Sam. As Paul left, his departure was without the dramatic flourish of our past arguments. Instead, a quiet, anticlimactic exit that allowed the gentle closing of the door to serve as his final goodbye. Retreating to the solace of my solitude, I reflected on what it meant to let go, to relinquish the dreams of what could have been for the reality of what must be. In the quiet aftermath, a newfound sense of pride welled within me. I would steer my destiny with a steady hand, come what may. The jagged edge of reality set in as I sat at my vanity, staring into the mirror at the woman I had become. A woman hardened by betrayal, but not broken by it. With each brushstroke through my hair, I steeled myself for the confrontation to come. I was tired of the shadow games and half-truths. It was time to drag everything into the light. Donning my armor of a charcoal business suit that accentuated my newfound resolve, I arrived at Paul's place of work, a towering testament to his professional success and personal failures. Blending into the anonymous flow of the city's morning hustle, I passed through the revolving doors of his corporate fortress with one objective: to ensure there would be no further avoidance or delays in the settlement of our divorce. Paul's supervisor, Mr. Green, was a man I had met but a few times, always in the periphery of company galas and charitable events. His demeanor carried the gravity of someone who understood the weight of his position, and as I sat in the waiting area of his office, I folded my hands, ready to lay out my case. The door to Mr. Green's office opened, and Paul's figure appeared, confusion marring his otherwise stern features. He had clearly been interrupted, pulled from whatever business matters had occupied his day. I could sense his annoyance, but the burning urgency in my gaze was enough to silence whatever complaint he might have vocalized. Mr. Green extended his hand, a practiced smile affixed to his face as he addressed me. "Miss Simmons, what brings you to our office today?" I took a deep breath, framing my thoughts into coherent sentences. The matter at hand is personal, but it has reached a point where I can no longer wait for my soon-to-be ex-husband to do the right thing. Our divorce must proceed, and I need assurance he will cooperate. Paul stiffened, his eyes darting to Mr. Green, then back to me. It was clear he had never anticipated our private discord intersecting with his professional life. "Please understand, Mr. Green," I continued, "my visit here is not to scandalize or to seek retribution, but to move forward with transparency and closure." The air between us was charged, the hum of company operations outside Mr. Green's door now a distant murmur. I watched as Mr. Green considered my words, his expression morphing from one of cordiality to concern. "I assure you, Mr. Green," I finished, "that our personal grievances will not impact Paul's responsibilities here at the company. I am merely seeking resolution so we may both proceed with our lives." Paul's protests were interwoven with pleas for discretion, but the truth couldn't be simpler. We were beyond the point of secrets and saving face. With a nod, Mr. Green assured me he would encourage Paul's cooperation. The meeting adjourned with a heavy finality, leaving me to navigate my way back out into the bustle of the city. As I walked, the gravity of my actions began to sink in. I had walked into the lion's den unflinching, laying bare the truth to the powers that would most impact Paul's decision-making. It wasn't long before news of the scandal made its way through the office grapevine. Paul and Emma's illicit relationship, once shrouded in whispers, was now cast into the unforgiving light of day. Emma's position within the company, intertwined as it was with her personal entanglements, became unmanageable. The fallout was swift and irrevocable for both of them, their reputations tarnished and their professional standing compromised. I returned home to the quiet of my study, allowing myself the brief luxury of unraveled composure. The sky outside was overcast, heavy with unreleased rain, a mirror to my own emotional state. Paul and Emma's fate was no longer my concern. I had severed the ties that bound me to their downfall. It was time for me to focus on the path ahead, to embrace whatever came next, with eyes wide open and heart slowly mending. Now, with the anticipation of an uncertain future tingling at my fingertips, I prepared myself for the next chapter, one that I would author on my own terms. The following weeks brought a whirlwind of change and, unexpectedly, hope. I was offered a full-time position at the marketing firm where I had found solace in part-time work, a lifeline that became a vessel for transformation. Gripping the opportunity with both hands, I dove into the work I loved, allowing it to support and reshape the newfound life that Sam and I were building. Sam was navigating his own changes, adapting to the shifting landscape of our family structure with a maturity beyond his years. Discussions of college applications and plans for the future became our new anchor points as we forged ahead in unison. One evening, as the soft glow of the sunset bathed the living room in warmth, Sam approached me, hesitant yet excited. "Mom," he began, "there's someone I want you to meet. I'm seeing someone, and, well, I think you'll like her." His words touched a tender spot within me. Even as he spoke, he fidgeted with the hem of his shirt, a nervous habit he'd had since childhood. "Sam, I'd be delighted to meet her," I assured him, my heart swelling. "But are you sure you're okay with me being there? I mean, after everything." He stopped me with a look, a knowing, reassuring gaze. "Mom, no matter how things ended with Paul, you were always there for me. You're my family. I want you to be part of this." As we shared a warm embrace, I realized that our bonds were indeed stronger than I had ever dared to hope. Sam's resilience and love gave me the strength to be the parent he deserved, regardless of any legal definition. With the official divorce proceedings behind us, my life took on a different rhythm, one filled with promise and productivity. The undertow of loneliness that often accompanied my nights slowly ebbed away, replaced by a sense of peace and fulfillment. Sam's presence was a constant reminder of the continuity of love and care I had provided over the years. Our interactions became less about filling the gaps left by Paul and more about celebrating each milestone, each victory, no matter how small. The college acceptance letter arrived like a beacon of triumph, its crisp white envelope holding so much more than just words. Inside was validation of Sam's talent, determination, and the future he was destined to seize. As he read the contents aloud, his voice crackled with emotion, and I felt my own chest tighten with pride. My own eyes grew misty as he looked up at me, the joy in his face mirrored in my own smile. This was our victory, one made sweeter by the struggles we had overcome. Whatever lay ahead, I knew we would face it together, buoyed by the understanding that family is not merely defined by blood, but by the shared experiences and unconditional support that bonds us. And as Sam set his sights on the horizon, ready to embrace college life and all the challenges it would bring, I stood by, ready to support him as I had always promised, as I would always do. With each passing day, the woman I saw in the mirror grew stronger, surer, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit forged in the fire of adversity and emerging, triumphant and hopeful, into the light of a new beginning. Months melded into a new kind of normalcy, the raw wounds of the past now healing into scars, reminders of battles fought and strength earned. In the solitude of my revitalized life, news of Paul and Emma reached me only in fragments, echoes of the life I had left behind. Through conversations with Mr. Green, whom I had come to regard as an ally in the corporate world, I learned that the once cohesive front Paul and Emma had presented had crumbled into a spectacle of blame and acrimony. The affair, once shrouded in secrecy, was now a specter that haunted their professional and personal lives with equal persistence. Their relationship buckled under the weight of public scrutiny and personal betrayals. Without the security of established careers at Paul's company, they found themselves adrift in a sea of their own making. The court battle over Emma's claims of emotional abuse and her subsequent demands for compensation was a drawn-out affair, leaving them both exposed and vulnerable. In the end, it was not just their careers that suffered a fatal blow, but their relationship too. Emma, still pregnant and now shouldering the disdain of her family, retreated from the public eye and the ire of her once lover. Paul, meanwhile, found himself unemployed at an age where starting over was more of a challenge than a prospect. Reports suggested he eventually settled for a part-time position at a local store, a shadow of his former glory. As these whispers of their struggles reached me, I found myself reflecting not with malice, but with a somber acknowledgement of life's unpredictable tides. There was no joy in their downfall, only the quiet affirmation that every choice leads us down a path of our own making. For Sam and me, the path was one of growth and newfound harmony. As he embarked on his college journey, I watched him navigate his newfound independence with the same resilience and integrity that had seen him through the chaos of our fractured family life. It was a bittersweet farewell when I dropped him off at his dormitory, but one filled with the promise of his bright future. Back in the fortress of my own rebuilding, surrounded by the familiar comforts of a home that had seen too much yet stood resilient, my career flourished. Returning as a full-time employee had reignited a passion that I had thought lost, infusing my days with purpose and fulfillment. In moments of solitude, I would sometimes catch myself marveling at the strength and serenity that had grown from the ashes of my previous life. There was a newfound sense of self that permeated every aspect of my existence, a calm confidence that whispered assurances of the possibilities that lay ahead. In the evenings when the golden glow of sunset bathed my garden in its warm embrace, I would think of Sam's parting words, that regardless of our lack of legal tie, I had always been and would always remain his true parent, in every sense that truly mattered. It was in these quiet moments that I knew the love and bonds we shared transcended all else. Our narrative had been one of trials and transformation, with the final pages yet to be written. Together and yet apart, we moved forward into our separate futures. A son stepping boldly into the world he would shape, and a mother standing proud, her resolve unshaken, ready for whatever chapters were yet to come. My name is Anna, and that morning was anything but peaceful. As the first wave of pain hit me, a sharp, stark reminder that our baby was on its way, I called out to my husband, Mark. "Mark, it's time," I gasped, clutching my swollen belly. He stumbled into the room, his eyes wide with a mixture of excitement and fear. Okay, let's go," he muttered, helping me to my feet. But before we could take another step, his phone rang. It was his mother, Evelyn. Despite my increasingly intense contractions, Mark answered the phone. "Mom? Now?" He hesitated, glancing at me with an apologetic look. I couldn't believe it. My husband, the man who had promised to be by my side through thick and thin, was considering abandoning me at this crucial moment. "Mark, please," I pleaded. "We need to go to the hospital." He nodded distractedly, murmuring a response to his mother. "Yes, Mom, I know, but Anna is in labor." The conversation seemed endless. With each passing second, my discomfort grew, both physically and emotionally. I felt a betrayal building, a stark realization that I was not his priority. Finally, Mark ended the call, his expression torn. "Anna, I have to drop Mom first. She has her weekly art class." I stared at him, incredulous. "Are you serious? Your child is about to be born." "I'm sorry, Anna," he mumbled, pulling out his wallet. "Here, take this." He handed me a $20 bill as if it could somehow compensate for his absence. Before I could protest, he was gone, the sound of the car engine fading into the distance. Left alone, pain surging through me, I felt a wave of despair. Our marriage, once a canvas of love and mutual respect, now seemed like a forgotten sketch, overshadowed by Evelyn's overbearing presence. I had met Mark in college, a charming senior who won my heart with his kind words and gentle demeanor. Our relationship blossomed, and soon after graduation, we married. Those days now seemed like a distant memory, a stark contrast to the cold reality of my current predicament. Evelyn, Mark's mother, had always been a challenging figure in our lives. Initially, I tried to see past her harsh words, believing it to be typical mother-in-law behavior. But over time, her true nature became apparent. She was manipulative, always finding ways to wedge herself between Mark and me. I remember our first meeting. Her eyes had scanned me critically, her lips curling in distaste. "What's with your hair, dear? Trying a bit too hard, aren't we?" I had felt so small, so judged. Mark had tried to brush it off, claiming she was just nervous. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. Her words were always laced with venom, her actions a clear indication of her desire to control every aspect of Mark's life. And now, as I stood alone in our living room, struggling with labor pains, I realized the extent of her hold over him. It was a revelation that stung sharply, a realization that I was secondary in my husband's life. As the pain intensified, a sense of urgency overcame me. I needed to get to the hospital, with or without Mark. I dialed a taxi, my hands trembling, tears streaming down my face. I was about to bring our child into the world, and I was doing it alone. The taxi arrived quickly, and as I stepped out of the house, I took one last look back. It was a bittersweet farewell to the life I thought I had, a life overshadowed by a woman who saw me as nothing more than an obstacle to her son's undivided attention. In the back seat of the taxi, as we sped towards the hospital, I made a silent vow. I would be strong, not just for my baby, but for myself. I would no longer be a victim of Evelyn's manipulations or Mark's inability to stand up to her. This was the beginning of a new chapter, one where I would reclaim my life and my dignity. As the hospital came into view, a sense of resolve settled over me. This was not the end, but a new beginning. A beginning where I would stand tall, a mother ready to face the world with her child. Life, I had learned, was full of surprises, some more bitter than others. As I lay in the hospital bed, awaiting the birth of my child, my mind wandered back to the early days with Mark and his mother, Evelyn. I had always known that Evelyn held a special place in Mark's life. She was, after all, a single mother who had raised him alone. But what I hadn't anticipated was the depth of her influence over him, a hold so strong it often left me feeling like an outsider in my own marriage. Our first meeting had been a disaster. I had spent hours preparing, eager to make a good impression, but from the moment Evelyn laid eyes on me, I knew I was fighting a losing battle. "What kind of girl dyes her hair such an outrageous color?" she had sneered, her eyes scanning my carefully styled hair. I had felt my cheeks burn with embarrassment, a sinking feeling in my stomach. Mark had hastily dyed my hair a more conservative shade the night before, hoping to please his mother. But it seemed nothing I did was good enough for Evelyn. Mark had always excused his mother's behavior. "She's just set in her ways," he would say, or "she means well, deep down." But as time went on, her thinly veiled insults and constant interference in our lives became harder to ignore. I remembered one particular evening, a dinner that had started off pleasantly enough. We were celebrating Mark's promotion at work, a momentous occasion. But Evelyn's presence had cast a shadow over our celebration. "You must be so proud of Mark," I had said, trying to make conversation. "Proud? Of what?" Evelyn had replied, her voice dripping with disdain. "A promotion in a job he only got because of his father's connections. I suppose it's an achievement for someone with such limited ambitions." I had watched, stunned, as Mark said nothing, his eyes fixed on his plate. It was moments like these that chipped away at my respect for him, his inability to stand up to his mother slowly eroding the love I had once felt. As my pregnancy progressed, Evelyn's hold on Mark seemed to tighten. She would call him at all hours, demanding his attention for the most trivial matters. And Mark, ever the dutiful son, would always comply. "You don't understand, Anna," he would say whenever I protested. "She's all alone. She needs me." "But what about me? What about our baby?" These were questions I stopped asking, knowing I would never get the answers I sought. And now, as I prepared to bring our child into the world, I realized how much I had lost. My marriage had become a shadow of what it once was, consumed by the overbearing presence of a woman who saw me as nothing more than a threat to her control over her son. As the nurses bustled around me, preparing for the delivery, I felt a sense of loneliness wash over me. I was about to become a mother, a role I had always dreamed of, but in that moment I felt more alone than ever. And yet, amidst the fear and uncertainty, there was a flicker of hope. This child, my child, would be my salvation. A new beginning, a chance to break free from the chains of a toxic bond and start anew. As the first cries of my baby filled the room, I felt a strength rise within me, a strength I didn't know I had. I was a mother now, and nothing would ever come between me and my child. As I held my newborn baby in my arms, feeling the tiny heartbeat against my chest, I reflected on the journey that had led me to this solitary but profound moment. The early days of my marriage to Mark, filled with love and shared dreams, now seemed like a distant mirage. After our wedding, I had entered our marriage with a heart full of hope. Mark and I had moved into a cozy apartment, a space we eagerly turned into our little haven. But as the days turned into months, the cracks began to show, widening with each passing moment. Mark's mother, Evelyn, became an ever-present shadow in our lives. Her calls were frequent, her demands increasingly unreasonable. Each time the phone rang, my heart sank, knowing it would pull Mark away from me, from us. I remember one evening, Mark and I had planned a quiet dinner at home. It was rare for us to have time alone, and I had spent the afternoon preparing his favorite dish. But just as we were about to sit down, his phone rang. It was Evelyn, and she needed him. Her car had broken down, and she insisted Mark come to help her, despite my suggestion to call a roadside assistance service. "Anna, she's my mother. I can't leave her stranded," Mark had said, his voice tinged with frustration. "But what about us, Mark? What about our plans?" I had asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He didn't answer, just grabbed his coat and left, leaving me alone with the dinner I had so lovingly prepared. That night, I ate alone, the silence of the apartment a stark reminder of my growing loneliness. As my pregnancy progressed, I hoped it would bring Mark closer, that the prospect of our own family would shift his priorities. But the opposite happened. Evelyn's calls became more frequent, her reasons for needing Mark more absurd. And Mark, trapped in a cycle of guilt and obligation, never said no. I tried to talk to him, to make him see how his actions were affecting our marriage, but my words fell on deaf ears. "She's alone, Anna. She has no one else," he would say, his eyes pleading for understanding. But what about me? Wasn't I his family too? These were questions I asked myself every night as I lay in bed, Mark often absent, attending to his mother's latest crisis. And then, the day my water broke, the day that should have been the happiest of our lives, Mark chose Evelyn over me, over our baby. It was a betrayal that cut deeper than any of her harsh words or his broken promises. In the hospital, cradling my baby, I made a decision. I would no longer be a bystander in my own life, watching as others dictated my happiness. I would stand up for myself, for my child. Mark had made his choice, and now it was time for me to make mine. As I gazed into the innocent eyes of my baby, I felt a resolve harden within me. I would leave Mark and his toxic bond with his mother. I would start afresh, build a life for me and my child, a life free of shadows and manipulation. My baby's soft cooing brought me back to the present, a gentle reminder of the new path that lay ahead. A path filled with challenges, no doubt, but also with the promise of freedom and a new beginning. As the first light of dawn broke through the hospital window, casting a warm glow over us, I knew that this was the start of something new. A journey of resilience and self-discovery, a journey where I would no longer be just Anna, but a mother, strong and undeterred. The day I was abandoned by my husband on the way to the hospital, my world shifted irreversibly. Lying in the hospital bed, cradling my newborn, I couldn't help but replay that day over and over in my mind. It started like any other day, except for the undercurrent of excitement and anticipation. The baby was due any day now, and every moment felt charged with the promise of new life. But when my water broke, that excitement turned to fear and urgency. Mark's reaction was a mix of panic and concern, but it was quickly overshadowed by his mother's timely interruption, the phone call that changed everything. Evelyn needed him, and despite the critical nature of our situation, Mark chose to respond to her call. I remember feeling a mix of disbelief and despair as he explained, his voice strained, "Anna, I promised to help Mom. She's waiting for me." "But Mark, I'm in labor. We need to go to the hospital now." My voice was a mixture of pain and pleading. He hesitated, torn, but then his resolve faltered. "I'm sorry, Anna. I'll be back as soon as I can. Here, take this for a taxi." He pressed a $20 bill into my hand, a paltry sum that felt like an insult in the enormity of the moment. As he drove away, leaving me alone and vulnerable on the verge of childbirth, I realized the bitter truth. My husband, the man I had loved and trusted, had chosen his mother over his wife and unborn child. The taxi ride to the hospital was a blur of pain and tears. I was alone, save for the sympathetic driver who tried his best to comfort me. His kindness was a small solace in the overwhelming sense of betrayal and abandonment I felt. In the hospital, as I labored to bring our child into the world, the absence of my husband was a gaping wound. The pain of childbirth was nothing compared to the heartache of his betrayal. But in that moment of intense vulnerability, I found an inner strength I didn't know I possessed. I was doing this alone, but I was doing it. With every contraction, every push, I was not only bringing new life into the world, but also birthing a new version of myself. When my baby finally arrived, the sound of his first cry was the sweetest music I had ever heard. As I held him in my arms, I knew that our journey together would be filled with challenges, but also with immeasurable love and joy. Mark's absence in those crucial hours spoke louder than any words he had ever said. It was a clear message that his loyalties lay elsewhere, not with the family we had created together. As I gazed down at my baby, a sense of determination settled over me. I would not let Mark's choices define us. We would move forward, just the two of us, and create a life filled with the love and stability that my child deserved. That day, I not only became a mother, but also made a vow to myself and my baby. We would no longer be secondary in someone else's life. We would be our own priority, our own family, and nothing would ever come between that. The first rays of morning light streamed through the hospital window, casting a gentle glow on the tiny face of my son. As I watched him sleep peacefully in my arms, a sense of clarity washed over me. I had crossed a threshold, stepping into a world where I was no longer just Anna, but a mother determined to forge a path filled with love and security for my child. The events of the previous day, with Mark's unfathomable decision to abandon me in my hour of need, still stung with fresh pain. Yet, as I looked at my son, I knew that this pain was not just an end but a beginning too. A beginning of a life where I was the sole architect of my destiny. I remembered waking up, still groggy from the exhaustion of childbirth, to find the room empty. There was no sign of Mark. The realization that he had not been there to witness the birth of our child, to share in the joy and awe of this miracle, was a sobering reminder of the reality I faced. As the morning progressed, my resolve strengthened. I knew I had to make decisions, not just for myself, but for the tiny life that depended on me. The first was to move out of the home I shared with Mark, and to seek the comfort and support of my own family. When Mark finally arrived, late in the afternoon, his face etched with concern and guilt, it was too late. The sight of him, once a source of comfort, now only brought a sense of betrayal. "Anna, I'm so sorry. I should have been here," he began, his voice trembling. But I cut him off, my own voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "Mark, you made your choice, and now I've made mine. I can't trust you to be there for us, not when it truly matters." The hurt in his eyes was evident, but the time for apologies and excuses had passed. As he looked at our son, a flicker of longing crossed his face, but I knew that longing was not enough. Can I hold him?" Mark asked hesitantly. I hesitated, torn between the desire to let him bond with his son and the need to protect my child from future hurt. But in the end, I handed our son to him, watching as Mark held him with a tenderness that contrasted sharply with his earlier abandonment. After a few moments, I took my son back, my decision firm. "Mark, I'll be going to my parents' house. We need space and time to figure things out." Mark nodded, the realization of the gravity of the situation dawning on him. "I understand. I'll give you whatever space you need." As I made arrangements for my discharge and subsequent move, I felt a sense of empowerment. I was taking control of my life, making choices that were right for me and my son. The journey ahead would be challenging, but I was ready to face it head on. Leaving the hospital that day, with my son cradled in my arms, I stepped into the crisp air, a sense of freedom enveloping me. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear: I was not alone. I had my son, and together we would navigate this new world, a world where we were each other's priority. The days following my discharge from the hospital were a blend of overwhelming love for my son and the stark reality of my new life. Moving in with my parents brought a much-needed sense of security and support. As I navigated the uncharted waters of motherhood, their presence was a comforting constant in the turbulence of my emotional upheaval. Mark's absence in our lives was palpable, but with each passing day, I grew more resolute in my decision. The breach of trust and his subsequent failure to prioritize our family were wounds too deep to simply heal with time and apologies. However, the finality of our separation brought its own set of challenges. I initiated divorce proceedings, a decision that was as painful as it was necessary. Mark was stunned, his initial disbelief giving way to a reluctant acceptance. The man who had once vowed to stand by me in sickness and in health now stood at a distance, a silent spectator to the dissolution of our marriage. The legal process was tedious, but amid the paperwork and meetings, I found a strength I didn't know I had. I was not just fighting for myself, but for my son, too. The settlement included a claim for damages, a recognition of the emotional and physical toll Mark's actions had taken on me, particularly during the vulnerable period of my pregnancy. As I juggled the demands of legal battles and new motherhood, word of our separation began to spread. Mark's mother, Evelyn, tried to reach out to me, but I firmly kept my distance. The toxic bond she shared with Mark had been a major catalyst in our downfall, and I was determined to shield myself and my son from further manipulation. In the midst of this, karma seemed to find its way to Mark. His reputation, once that of a loving husband and doting father, was now tarnished. His colleagues and friends who had once admired his commitment to his family now viewed him with a mix of pity and disdain. The man who had prided himself on his familial values had fallen from grace, and the community's judgment was swift and unforgiving. As for me, I found solace in the little moments with my son. His first smile, the way his tiny fingers wrapped around mine, the soft coos as he drifted to sleep. These were the joys that filled my days and gave me the strength to keep moving forward. Slowly but surely, I began to rebuild my life. My parents, ever supportive, were my pillars of strength, and my son was my beacon of hope. The journey was not easy, but it was filled with small victories and immense growth. Looking back, I realized how far I had come. From a wife overshadowed by the influence of a controlling mother-in-law to a single mother standing on her own 2 feet, the transformation was nothing short of remarkable. And as I lay my son down to sleep each night, I whispered promises of a better future, a future where we were not defined by the past, but shaped by the love and resilience that had brought us this far. Years have passed since the day I made the decision to walk away from a marriage that had become a shadow of what it once promised. As I sit in the quiet of my parents' garden watching my son play, his laughter a balm to my soul, I reflect on the journey that brought us here. The path was not easy. There were moments of doubt, nights filled with tears, and days when the weight of single motherhood felt overwhelming. But each challenge also brought with it a lesson in strength, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. Mark, once a central figure in my life, now seemed like a distant memory. His attempts to reconcile, initially frequent and desperate, had slowly dwindled over time. The last I heard, he had moved to another city, a consequence of the life he had chosen. His mother, Evelyn, remained a part of his life, but their bond, once the cause of so much pain in mine, was no longer my concern. My son, now a vibrant and curious little boy, was the source of my strength. His presence reminded me daily of the decision I made, not just for myself, but for him. A decision to break free from a toxic environment and provide him with a life filled with love, stability, and the freedom to grow. My parents, ever supportive, had been my rock through it all. They had embraced their roles as grandparents with a love and dedication that filled our home with warmth. Their support had been invaluable, giving me the space and strength to find my footing as a single mother. As I watched my son, I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride in the person I had become. The journey had reshaped me, not just as a mother but as an individual. I had found a sense of purpose, a clarity that only comes from facing and overcoming life's trials. Life, I realized, is a tapestry of experiences, each thread woven with moments of joy and sorrow, victories and defeats. My story was no different. It was a story of love lost and found, of betrayal and forgiveness, of falling down and rising up stronger. In this moment of reflection, I knew that the road ahead would have its own set of challenges. But I also knew that I was no longer the woman who once felt helpless in the face of adversity. I was stronger, wiser, and more resilient. As the sun set, casting a warm glow over the garden, I called out to my son. He ran to me, his face alight with the simple joy of childhood. And in his embrace, I found not just the love of a child, but the promise of a future filled with hope and endless possibilities. Life had come full circle, and as I held my son close, I knew that this was just the beginning. A beginning of a new chapter. A chapter where we were the protagonists of our own story. A story of triumph and resilience. My husband Nathan and I had been trying for a baby for years, each failed attempt driving a deeper wedge between us. Our once joyful conversations had turned into a suffocating silence. That evening, as I prepared dinner, Nathan walked in, his face etched with resolve. He sat down and said words that would forever echo in my heart. "Emily, I can't do this anymore. I've met someone else, and she's pregnant with my child." I felt my knees weaken. "But Nathan, what about us? All our plans?" I stammered, my voice barely a whisper. "There's no us anymore, Em. I need a real family. You just can't give me that," he replied, his voice as cold as the chill seeping through the window. His words cut through me. I was not just losing my husband, but also my dream of being a mother. The nights that followed were sleepless, filled with tears and unanswered questions. I was haunted by his parting words, a cruel reminder of my supposed inadequacy. The divorce proceedings were brutal. Nathan's words, sharp as knives, were relentless. "I should have known better than to waste my years on a barren woman," he spat out during one of our meetings. Julie, his pregnant mistress, stood smirking beside him. I signed the papers, each stroke of the pen feeling like an end to a chapter I had so dearly held on to. I left my job at the library, the place where Nathan and I had first met, and moved back to my parents' house. The walls of my old bedroom, once a canvas of teenage dreams, now felt like the boundaries of my failure. The loneliness was suffocating, and the societal whispers of being childless added to my agony. But amidst this despair, a small ray of hope emerged. A routine visit to the doctor revealed a truth that would change everything. I wasn't the one with fertility issues. It had always been Nathan. This revelation brought a bittersweet sense of liberation. I wasn't the flawed one in our marriage. Armed with this truth, I began to see a path forward. It was time to rebuild, to rediscover who I was beyond Nathan's shadow. In the quietness of Maplewood, I started piecing back my life. It was a slow, often painful journey, but with each passing day, I found strength in my newfound independence. I was determined to rise from the ashes of my broken marriage, stronger and more resilient than ever. Living back in my childhood home in Maplewood felt like stepping into a time capsule, yet everything was tinted with the gray hues of my recent past. My parents, though supportive, often tiptoed around me, their eyes reflecting a mix of concern and unspoken questions. I took a job at a local cafe, a far cry from the library where every shelf whispered memories of Nathan. One crisp morning, as I served coffee to a regular customer, I realized how much I had changed. Gone was the woman who dreamt of cradling her own child, replaced by someone hardened by betrayal. Yet in that hardness, there was an emerging sense of resilience. My transformation wasn't just emotional. A few months after the divorce, I discovered something that turned my world upside down again. But this time in a different way. It turned out I wasn't infertile. The problem had always been with Nathan. The revelation was like a storm clearing the skies. All those years of self-blame, the guilt that I carried, dissolved. I was not the broken one. With this newfound clarity, a spark of anger ignited within me. Nathan had not only left me for someone else, but had also made me believe I was the reason we couldn't have a child. Fueled by this anger, I began to plot my revenge. It was not something dark or sinister, but a desire to confront Nathan and Julie with the truth, to see the realization dawn in their eyes that the fault had never been mine. The opportunity came unexpectedly. I learned through old mutual friends that Nathan and Julie, now his wife, were organizing a charity event at a local community center. It would be a public setting, a perfect stage for my unspoken play. I arrived at the event dressed inconspicuously, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. I spotted them across the room, Nathan looking dapper in his suit and Julie, radiant, holding their daughter, Lily. Taking a deep breath, I walked up to them, my steps measured and firm. "Hello, Nathan, Julie," I said, my voice steady. Their expressions shifted from surprise to disdain. "Emily, what are you doing here?" Nathan asked, a sneer forming on his lips. I looked straight into his eyes, the eyes that once promised forever. "I came to congratulate you, Nathan, on your family, but there's something you should know." "And what's that?" Julie chimed in, her voice laced with sarcasm. "The child we never had, Nathan, it wasn't because of me. I'm not the infertile one, I said, the words tasting like freedom. The color drained from Nathan's face, his confident posture faltering. Julie's eyes widened in shock, her grip on Lily tightening. I thought you should know the truth. Goodbye, Nathan. Goodbye, Julie, I said, turning away, leaving them in a sea of unspoken words and dawning realizations. As I walked away, I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders. It wasn't a dramatic showdown or a vindictive scheme, but in that moment I reclaimed my dignity and truth. I walked out of that community center not as a victim, but as a survivor, ready to write the next chapter of my life on my own terms. Months had passed since my encounter with Nathan and Julie at the charity event. That moment, liberating as it was, had stirred something in me. A need for a closure I hadn't realized I craved. Life in Maplewood carried on, my days at the cafe filled with the familiar hum of coffee machines and casual chatter, but my thoughts often drifted to that day. Then came the unexpected invitation to my niece's birthday party at the city aquarium. The aquarium, a place of wonder and serenity, soon became the stage for a confrontation I never anticipated. As I meandered through the crowds, admiring the dance of colorful fish behind glass walls, a familiar, contemptuous voice pierced through the tranquility. Well, if it isn't Emily, still wandering alone in life? I turned to see Nathan, Julie, and a young girl, presumably their daughter, standing a few feet away. My heart raced, but this time not from fear or surprise, but from a sense of indignation. What brings you here, Nathan? I asked, my voice calm yet edged with defiance. We're here for Lily's school project. Unlike some, we're a proper family, Nathan sneered, his eyes scanning my solitary figure with disdain. Julie chimed in, her voice dripping with false pity. It must be hard, seeing what you could never have. Their words, meant to wound, only fueled my resolve. I'm here for my niece's birthday, and for your information, I can have children. The issue was never with me. The smugness on Nathan's face faltered, replaced by an unmistakable flash of surprise. Julie's expression twisted, a mix of confusion and anger. It's sad, really, how you cling to these lies to feel better about your lonely existence, Nathan retorted, attempting to regain his composure. Before I could reply, a small voice piped up from behind me. Aunt Emily, who are these people? I turned to see my niece, Anna, looking up at me with curious eyes. Her innocent interruption was like a breath of fresh air, dissipating the tension. These are just some old acquaintances, sweetie, I replied, taking her hand. Let's go see the dolphins, shall we? As we walked away, I heard Julie's hushed, venomous voice. Can't even admit her own failures. Pathetic. Their words no longer had the power they once did. I had moved beyond their reach, their insults mere echoes of a past I had overcome. My focus was on the present, on the joy in Anna's eyes as we watched the graceful dolphins. That day at the aquarium, amidst the beauty of marine life, I realized that my worth wasn't defined by Nathan's perceptions or society's expectations. I was more than a chapter in someone else's story. I was the author of my own. In the weeks following the aquarium incident, I found myself reflecting on my encounters with Nathan and Julie. Their attempts to belittle me had lost their sting, but a desire for a more definitive closure lingered. I wanted them to see me not just as someone who had moved on, but as someone who had triumphed over the adversities they had thrown at me. The perfect opportunity presented itself unexpectedly. News broke out that Nathan's company was facing financial troubles. This, coupled with rumors of strife in his marriage, painted a picture of a life far from perfect. It was then I decided to attend the high school reunion, knowing Nathan and Julie would be there. It was time they saw the new me, not just heard about it. Dressed in a simple yet elegant dress, I entered the reunion with a confidence I never knew I had. The room buzzed with the chatter of old classmates, but it fell silent as Nathan and Julie entered. He looked older, the lines of stress evident on his face, while Julie clung to his arm, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. I mingled, catching up with old friends, feeling their surprised glances as they took in my transformation. Then, as I had anticipated, I found myself face to face with Nathan and Julie. Emily, you actually came. Thought you'd be too busy with your... What do you do now? Nathan sneered, his words laced with condescension. I manage a cafe in Maplewood. It's fulfilling, more than you'd think, I replied, my voice steady. Julie laughed, a hollow sound. A cafe manager? How quaint! We heard about your little scene at the aquarium, still trying to convince the world about your fertility? Their words, meant to sting, fell flat. Actually, I'm here to enjoy the reunion, not to discuss my personal life. But since you brought it up, yes, I can have children. The issue was never with me, and I'm content with my life, which is more than I can say for some. The look of shock on their faces was gratifying, but I didn't linger to savor it. I excused myself, leaving them standing amidst a crowd that had subtly turned its attention to our exchange. Later that evening, as the reunion was winding down, Nathan approached me, a hint of desperation in his eyes. "Emily, about what you said earlier." "I meant every word, Nathan. I've moved on. I suggest you do the same," I said, cutting him off. He looked at me, a mix of anger and something that resembled regret, before turning away. Julie watched from a distance, her expression unreadable. As I left the reunion, I felt a sense of finality. I had faced Nathan and Julie not as the woman they thought they had broken, but as someone who had risen above it all. My past with Nathan was now just that, the past. I was ready to embrace whatever the future held, on my terms. The months following the high school reunion were a period of profound personal growth for me. I had faced Nathan and Julie not once but twice, and each time I had emerged stronger. My cafe in Maplewood had become a haven, a place where I could pour my energy and creativity. But fate, it seemed, wasn't quite done with our intertwined stories. One afternoon, as I was arranging pastries in the display case, my phone buzzed. An unknown number flashed on the screen. Hesitantly, I answered, and was met with a voice I hadn't expected to hear again, Nathan's. "Emily, we need to talk," he said, his voice strained. "Why are you calling me, Nathan?" "I thought we made it clear at the reunion that we've moved on," I replied, my guard instantly up. "It's about Julie. She's left me, took Lily with her, and the company's gone under. I'm ruined," he confessed, his voice breaking. A part of me felt a twinge of pity, but it was quickly overshadowed by a sense of ironic justice. "I'm sorry to hear that, Nathan, but why tell me?" "I thought maybe there's still something. We had good times, remember?" His voice was a mix of desperation and hope. "Nathan, those times are long gone. You made your choices. I've made mine," I said firmly. There was a pause, a silence filled with unspoken words. "I guess I deserved this," he finally said, a note of resignation in his voice. "You should focus on rebuilding your life, Nathan. Goodbye." I ended the call, a sense of final closure washing over me. The news of Nathan's downfall spread through our small town. Some expressed sympathy, but many remembered how he had treated me, how he had left for Julie when he thought the grass was greener. Karma, it seemed, had come full circle. In the weeks that followed, I poured my heart into the cafe, creating a space of warmth and welcome for anyone who walked through its doors. My past with Nathan became just a chapter in my life, a story of resilience and renewal. As I closed the cafe one evening, I took a moment to reflect. The journey had been long and often painful, but it had led me to a place of peace and self-acceptance. Nathan's choices had led him down his path, and I had forged my own. In the end, I realized that the best revenge was living well, finding happiness in my own achievements, and leaving the past where it belonged. I had emerged not just unbroken, but stronger, ready to embrace whatever the future held. "Sure, but you're going to be the one stuck with those 5 kids. I'm taking the house," Daniel said, his voice dripping with a smugness that sent shivers down my spine. His words were a slap in the face, a stark reminder of how far we had drifted from the love that once seemed unbreakable. I took a deep breath, steadying my shaking hands. "You think this is just about the house, Daniel?" I asked, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. He shrugged, a smirk playing on his lips. "What else is there, Laura? You'll crawl back eventually. You need me." That was Daniel, arrogant, dismissive, and utterly blind to the wreckage of our family that lay at his feet. Our journey together, which had begun with laughter and dreams in the corridors of college, had twisted into this bitter, unrecognizable end. "You've always underestimated me," I said quietly, my mind made up. "But not anymore. I'm filing for divorce, Daniel. And I'm taking the kids." His laughter was cruel, a sound that echoed in the empty spaces of our once happy home. "Divorce? You think you can manage without me? Go ahead, try. But remember, I'm keeping the house, and without my money, good luck surviving." I looked into his eyes, searching for a trace of the man I had fallen in love with, but all I saw was a stranger, a cold, heartless stranger. I turned away, my heart heavy, but my decision firm. "You'll see, Daniel. You'll see what life is like without us, and when you do, don't come looking for me." With those words, I left the room, leaving behind the shattered remains of what was once my life. The kids were still asleep, unaware of the storm that was about to change our lives forever. As I packed a few essentials, my mind raced with plans and possibilities. I had to be strong, not just for myself, but for the 5 beautiful reasons sleeping in their rooms. They deserved a life free from the shadow of their father's indifference and cruelty. I glanced back one last time at the home that had held so many dreams and whispered a goodbye to a past that could never be reclaimed. Stepping out into the crisp morning air, I felt a sense of freedom, tinged with fear and uncertainty. But above all, there was hope. A fragile, flickering hope that from the ashes of our broken family, something new and beautiful could arise. The journey ahead would be challenging, but I was ready. Ready to fight, ready to rebuild, and ready to show Daniel that his arrogance would be his downfall. This wasn't just the end of a marriage, it was the beginning of a new chapter, one where I was the author of my own destiny. The day I met Daniel at college, he was the epitome of charm and wit. His laughter was infectious, and his promises were like a beacon of hope. We were young, in love, and naive enough to believe that love was all we needed. Fast forward to our married life, things started to change slowly yet painfully. The once attentive and caring Daniel became distant, his smiles replaced by frowns, and his warm embraces turned cold. It hit me hardest after the birth of our twins, Ellie and Ethan. I still remember holding them in my arms, their tiny fingers wrapped around mine, and looking up to see Daniel standing at the door, his expression unreadable. "Why won't you hold them?" I asked, my voice a mix of bewilderment and hope. "They are your children, Daniel." He shrugged, avoiding my gaze. I just don't know how to handle them." I tried to understand, to believe that it was just a phase, that soon he would be the doting father I had imagined he would be. But as days turned to months, the distance only grew. When I brought up the idea of having another child, hoping it might bridge the gap between us, his response was lukewarm. "Sure, if that's what you want." But it was never what he wanted, was it? The man who once dreamed of a big, happy family was now a shadow of his former self, buried under excuses and avoidance. Our life became a cycle of unmet expectations and silent dinners. The laughter and love that once filled our home were replaced by a deafening silence, broken only by the children's laughter, a sound that seemed to alienate Daniel even more. "Why don't you spend time with the kids?" I asked one evening, my voice a mere whisper, heavy with unshed tears. He didn't even look up from his phone. "I'm busy, Laura. You know how it is." But I didn't know. I didn't understand how the man I loved could turn his back on his own flesh and blood. How he could retreat into a shell, leaving me to juggle the responsibilities of 5 young lives alone. The more I tried to reach out, the more he pulled away, burying himself in work, and on the rare occasions he was home, he was like a ghost, present in body but absent in every way that mattered. As I lay in bed that night, the moon casting a pale light across the room, I realized the painful truth. The Daniel I fell in love with was gone, replaced by a stranger I no longer recognized, a stranger who wore the mask of my husband but whose eyes were void of the warmth and love that had once drawn me to him. I knew then that I had to make a choice, not just for myself, but for Ellie, Ethan, and the triplets. I had to step out of the shadow of a broken marriage and into the light of a new beginning. A beginning where I was strong, independent, and free from the chains of disappointment and unfulfilled promises. As the first light of dawn crept through the window, I made a silent vow. I would not let Daniel's indifference break me. I would rise from the ashes of our failed marriage and build a life of happiness and love for my children and myself. A life where we were no longer just surviving, but thriving. Living with Daniel had become like navigating a minefield, each step uncertain and fraught with the risk of emotional detonation. The house, once a symbol of our shared dreams, had become a prison of my frustrations and his indifference. "Mom, why doesn't Daddy play with us?" Ellie's innocent question one evening cut through me. I looked into her curious eyes, her twin brother Ethan nodding along, seeking an answer I didn't have. I knelt down, enveloping them in a hug, trying to shield them from the harsh reality. "Daddy's just very busy, sweethearts. But he loves you very much," I lied, my heart aching with the falsehood. The truth was Daniel had become a stranger not only to me, but to our children as well. His presence at home was like a passing shadow, cold and fleeting. The man who once dreamt of a bustling, joyful household now seemed burdened by the very existence of his own family. Our triplets, barely 2 years old, had quickly learned to rely solely on me. The lack of paternal affection had become their normal, and it pained me to see the void in their young lives. "Daniel, you need to spend time with your children. They hardly know you," I confronted him one night, the words spilling out in a mix of frustration and desperation. He scoffed, flipping through channels on the TV. "What's the point? They have you. Isn't that enough?" His dismissive tone stung, but it was the underlying implication that wounded me deeply. In his eyes, I was just the caretaker, a background fixture in the narrative of his life. The financial strain only added to the growing chasm between us. Daniel's salary was decent, but with his increasing detachment, he became more secretive about our finances. I remember stumbling upon a credit card bill, hidden beneath a pile of papers. The numbers danced before my eyes, countless transactions, none of which were for the family. It was as if Daniel was living a separate life, one where we didn't exist. "Daniel, we need to talk about our finances. The kids' expenses are mounting, and we can't keep up like this," I said one evening, mustering all the courage I had. He barely glanced at me, his eyes glued to his phone. "Why? You managing fine, aren't you? Just cut back on whatever you're wasting money on." His words were like a slap in the face. Wasting money? On what? The children's needs? Food? The basic necessities of life? The more I tried to bridge the gap, the more he retreated into his shell, leaving me alone to bear the weight of our crumbling world. The loneliness was crushing, but it was the helplessness that consumed me. The feeling of being trapped in a loveless marriage, fighting a losing battle for the sake of my children. But amidst the despair, a fire was kindling within me, a fire of defiance, a determination to no longer be a silent sufferer in the narrative Daniel had written for us. I was ready to rewrite our story, one where the children and I were not just mere characters in the background, but the protagonists of our own lives. And as I tucked my children into bed that night, whispering stories of love and hope, I knew the time had come. The time to step out of the shadows and into the light. The time to reclaim our lives from the clutches of a man who had forgotten the meaning of family. The day I decided to break free from Daniel's grasp, I felt a mix of fear and liberation. The morning air was crisp, a stark contrast to the stifling atmosphere within our home. As I prepared breakfast, Daniel sauntered into the kitchen, his demeanor as cold as ever. "What's this?" he sneered, looking at the simple meal I had put together. "It's breakfast," I replied, my voice calm but firm. He scoffed, pushing the plate away. "This is what I get after working all day? You can't even cook a decent meal?" I clenched my fists, fighting the urge to retaliate. For years, I had tolerated his belittling remarks, his disregard for our family. But not anymore. "Daniel, the kids need new clothes, and the school fees are due. We need to discuss our finances," I ventured, hoping for a rational conversation. He rolled his eyes, dismissing my concerns with a wave of his hand. "Your job is to take care of the house and the kids. I do my part. Don't expect more." That was the moment I realized nothing would ever change. Daniel would never see us as his priority. His family was just a burden, an inconvenience in his self-centered world. Later that day, as I watched the children play, their laughter a bittersweet sound, I knew I had to take a stand. For them, for me. "Daniel, we need to talk. This can't go on," I said when he finally returned home that evening. He looked at me, a sneer forming on his lips. "What now, Laura? Tired of your comfortable life?" His words ignited something within me. "Comfortable? You call this comfortable? Your children barely know you, and you think throwing money at us is enough?" He laughed, a sound devoid of warmth. "Oh, please, you've had it easy. Don't start playing the victim now." His lack of empathy, his sheer arrogance was staggering. "It's not about being a victim, Daniel. It's about our family. But you wouldn't understand that, would you?" For a moment, he looked taken aback, as if the idea of anyone challenging him was unthinkable. "You think you can manage without me?" Go ahead, try, he challenged, his voice laced with contempt. I looked him in the eye, my resolve strengthening. I can, and I will. I'm filing for divorce, Daniel. I refuse to let you drag me and the children down any longer. For the first time, I saw a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes, but it was quickly replaced by his usual arrogance. Divorce? Fine. But remember, I'm keeping the house, and good luck with the kids on your own. As he walked away, a sense of determination washed over me. I wasn't afraid anymore. I was ready to fight for a better future, for a life where my children and I were more than just afterthoughts in someone else's story. I tucked the children into bed that night, their innocent faces a reminder of the battle ahead. But I was ready to break free from the chains of a loveless marriage and start anew, ready to show Daniel that his neglect and cruelty would be his undoing. The day I started the divorce proceedings, I felt a mix of trepidation and resolve. As I sat in the lawyer's office, outlining the years of neglect and emotional abandonment, the weight of my decision sank in. Mrs. Williams, we'll ensure you get what you deserve in this settlement. Your children's well-being is our priority, the lawyer assured me. I nodded, feeling a sense of empowerment. For the first time in years, I was taking control of my life. When I informed Daniel about the divorce, his reaction was predictably dismissive. Divorce? You think you can handle everything on your own? This will be amusing. His words no longer hurt me. Instead, they fueled my determination to build a better future for myself and my children. As the legal battle ensued, Daniel's true colors became even more apparent. He was more concerned about his finances and the house than the emotional trauma he had inflicted on our family. You're trying to rob me of everything, Laura. That house is mine. I worked for it, he shouted during one of our mediated sessions. I looked at him, my resolve unwavering. This isn't about the house, Daniel. It's about our children, their future. But you wouldn't understand that. The legal process was draining, both emotionally and financially. But with each passing day, my resolve strengthened. I was fighting for justice, for recognition of the years I had spent in the shadow of a man who valued his ego more than his family. During the final hearing, Daniel's arrogance was on full display. You think you've won, Laura? You'll come crawling back. You can't survive without me. But he was wrong. I had survived, and I would continue to do so. The court's judgment was in my favor, granting me custody of the children and a fair settlement. As I walked out of the courtroom, a sense of liberation washed over me. I had stood up to the man who had tried to diminish my worth, and I had emerged victorious. That evening, as I sat with my children, their laughter filling our modest but warm home, I knew I had made the right decision. We were starting a new chapter, one of hope and new beginnings. Daniel's attempts to intimidate me had failed. He had underestimated my strength, my resilience. And now, he was the one left to grapple with the consequences of his actions. I looked at my children, their faces beaming with happiness, and I knew we would be okay. We had each other, and that was all that mattered. The path to liberation had been long and fraught with challenges, but I had walked it with my head held high. And as I put my children to bed that night, I whispered a promise to them and to myself. We would never be victims of Daniel's cruelty again. We were free, and we would thrive. The days following the divorce were a blend of relief and rebuilding. My sister Emily became my rock during this tumultuous time. Moving in with her was a decision born out of necessity, but it blossomed into a period of healing and growth for me and the children. Laura, you're stronger than you realize, Emily said one evening as we sat in her cozy living room, the kids asleep in the next room. Her words were a balm to my weary soul. I had to be for the kids, I replied, my voice tinged with a mixture of pride and exhaustion. The practical aspects of starting over were daunting. The financial settlement from the divorce was a relief, but it was the emotional scars that were harder to heal. Emily's support was invaluable. She was more than just a sister. She was a mentor, a friend. Daniel's absence became more pronounced in the kids' lives, but we filled the void with love and laughter. Emily's bond with the children grew each day, her natural maternal instinct a comfort to their wounded hearts. I found a job at a local library, a place that offered not just employment, but a sanctuary of sorts. The routine, the sense of purpose, was therapeutic. Slowly, I was reclaiming my identity, no longer just Daniel's wife or the mother of his children, but Laura, strong, independent, and resilient. But the journey wasn't without its challenges. Daniel's shadow loomed over our lives in unexpected ways. He tried to worm his way back into our lives, his messages oscillating between apologies and accusations. "You'll regret this, Laura. You and the kids need me," he texted one night, his words a stark reminder of the manipulation I had escaped. I didn't respond. Emily's advice echoed in my mind. "Don't let him back in, Laura. You've come too far." Her words were my anchor, keeping me steady in the face of Daniel's persistent attempts to unsettle me. The children adjusted to our new life with remarkable resilience. Their laughter filled Emily's home, turning it into a haven of hope and new beginnings. We had our moments of struggle, of course, but we faced them together as a family. As the weeks turned into months, I realized the divorce had not just been the end of a painful chapter, but the start of a new narrative. A narrative where I was the author, where my children and I were the main characters, charting a course towards a future filled with possibility. Emily and I would often sit on her porch after the kids were asleep, talking about life, dreams, and the future. In those quiet moments, I found a peace I hadn't known in years. "You've done it, Laura," Emily would say, her eyes shining with pride. "You've built a new life for yourself and the kids." And she was right. Against all odds, we had built something beautiful from the ashes of my broken marriage. We were no longer just surviving, we were thriving. Months had passed since the divorce, and life had settled into a new rhythm. However, the peace was abruptly shattered one evening by an unexpected call from Daniel. I hesitated as I saw his name flash on the screen. Taking a deep breath, I answered, bracing myself for what was to come. "What do you want, Daniel?" His voice was a mix of desperation and arrogance. "Laura, you need to come back. The kids need a father." I couldn't help but scoff. "They have been doing just fine without you." "You're turning them against me," he accused, his voice rising in anger. "No, Daniel, you did that all by yourself," I replied, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "I've changed, Laura. I realize my mistakes now. Let's start over," he pleaded, but his words rang hollow. I felt a surge of anger and disbelief. "Start over? After everything you've done? You're delusional, Daniel." There was a pause on the line, and when he spoke again, his tone had changed. "You'll regret this, Laura. You can't keep me away from my kids forever." I clenched my phone, feeling a mix of anger and determination. "Watch me, Daniel. I will do whatever it takes to protect them from you." The call ended with a click, leaving me shaken but resolute. I knew Daniel's threats were not to be taken lightly, but I was no longer the woman who had tolerated his neglect and abuse. In the weeks that followed, Daniel's attempts to worm his way back into our lives intensified. He tried to sway the children with gifts, to charm Emily with false apologies, but we stood firm. Then came the day when I received a letter from Daniel's lawyer, demanding visitation rights. It was a move I had anticipated, yet it filled me with dread. I met with my lawyer, my resolve unwavering. I won't let him near the kids. He's a toxic influence. "We'll fight this, Laura," my lawyer assured me. "You have a strong case." The ensuing legal battle was draining, but I was fighting for something far more important than my own well-being. I was fighting for my children's future. As I sat in the courtroom listening to Daniel's lawyer paint him as a reformed man, a devoted father, I felt a surge of anger. He was playing the victim, twisting the narrative to suit his agenda. But the evidence was on my side. The years of neglect, the emotional trauma he had inflicted, spoke louder than his empty words. The judge's verdict was a vindication of all we had endured. Daniel's request for visitation was denied, with the judge citing concerns for the children's emotional well-being. As I walked out of the courtroom, a weight lifted off my shoulders. I had stood up to Daniel not just for myself, but for my children. I had shown them the strength of standing up to injustice, to fight for what is right. We were free from Daniel's shadow, finally. The road ahead would have its challenges, but we were ready to face them together. As I tucked the kids into bed that night, I knew we had turned a page. We were no longer bound by the chains of the past. We were moving forward, towards a future filled with hope and promise. And as I turned off the lights, a sense of peace settled over me. We were safe, we were together, and we were home. "I've had enough, Nathan. I want a divorce." The words tumbled from my mouth, heavy with a mixture of fear and resolution. Nathan, my husband of 6 years, stared at me, his face a blend of disbelief and anger. "What are you talking about, Eliza? This is ridiculous," he exclaimed, his voice rising in frustration. I took a step back, feeling the weight of years of unspoken grievances pressing down on me. "This isn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. I've thought this through," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. Nathan scoffed and crossed his arms. "You'll change your mind. You always do." But this time was different. I wouldn't change my mind. The endless cycle of neglect, his dismissive attitude towards my career as an interior designer, and the stifling loneliness that had crept into our marriage were suffocating me. It was time for a change. I had a business trip scheduled that day, a brief escape to another state for a project that demanded my expertise. Time was not on my side, and Nathan's unwillingness to have a constructive conversation only cemented my decision. I grabbed my suitcase, giving him one last look, a mix of sorrow and determination in my eyes. "I really mean it, Nathan. I'm done." His response was a cold, harsh laugh as he turned away, dismissing my words and me along with them. I left the house, the sound of the slamming door echoing my tumultuous emotions. The business trip was a blur. Meetings, presentations, and polite conversations with clients filled my days, but my mind was elsewhere, replaying the scene with Nathan over and over. I felt a strange blend of liberation and fear. Was I ready for the unknown that lay ahead? Returning home the next day, the house was silent, almost reflective of the void in my heart. "I'm back," I called out, but there was no response. On the dining table lay a business card, a divorce lawyer's. Nathan had made his move, quicker than I had anticipated. I picked up the card, my fingers tracing the embossed letters. Nathan's quick decision surprised me, but in a way, it was a relief. Maybe he too realized that our marriage was beyond repair. Maybe this was for the best. Resolute, I dialed the number on the card. It was time to close this chapter of my life and begin anew. As I waited for the call to connect, a sense of empowerment washed over me. This was not the end of my story, but the beginning of a new one. My story, on my terms. As I sat in my home office, the echoes of my conversation with the divorce lawyer still lingered in my mind. The room, once a sanctuary where I sketched and imagined beautiful spaces, now felt like a capsule of my failed marriage. I let my gaze drift across the room, landing on the framed photos of Nathan and me. Our smiles in those pictures seemed to belong to strangers. It's hard to believe that just 6 years ago, Nathan and I were the quintessential happy couple. We met at a mutual friend's art exhibit. He was charming, with a quick wit that matched my own. Our shared love for art and design drew us together. We would spend hours discussing the latest trends in interior design, often debating over styles and aesthetics. When Nathan proposed, it felt like a fairy tale. We dreamt of building a life together, filled with love, shared ambitions, and eventually a family. However, reality painted a starkly different picture. Nathan's true colors began to show soon after our wedding. Initially, his comments were subtle, a jest about my job as an interior designer being just a hobby, or a passing remark about how a wife should prioritize home over career. But gradually his words grew sharper, his attitude more dismissive. The change in our relationship wasn't just emotional, but also practical. We had agreed to share household responsibilities, but soon all the tasks fell on my shoulders. Nathan would come home from his job at the architectural firm and immediately retreat to his study, leaving me to juggle my work deadlines and household chores alone. I tried to talk to him, to remind him of the partnership we had promised each other. But each conversation ended in an argument, with Nathan declaring that housework wasn't his job. As I reflected on these moments, a sense of clarity began to dawn on me. I had been living in a facade, a marriage that looked perfect from the outside but was crumbling within. I wasn't just fighting for a divorce. I was fighting for my self-respect. It was then that I made a promise to myself. No longer would I be the Eliza who nodded and smiled, suppressing her own needs and desires. It was time to rebuild not just my life, but also my identity. An identity not defined by Nathan or our failed marriage, but by my own strengths and passions. As I stood up from my desk, a newfound determination filled me. The road ahead would be challenging, but I was ready to face it head-on. I was ready to rediscover the Eliza who dreamed of creating beauty in the world, one space at a time. The days following my decision to divorce Nathan were a whirlwind of emotions and legal consultations. But amidst this chaos, I discovered something that turned my world upside down. Nathan was having an affair. I stumbled upon this revelation one evening while working late on a project. My phone buzzed with a notification from a social media platform, a tag and a photo from a user I didn't recognize. Curiosity piqued. I opened the app, and there it was, a photo that felt like a punch to the gut. Nathan, arm in arm with a younger woman, smiling as if he hadn't a care in the world. The woman, Bella Harper, was an influencer known for her glamorous lifestyle posts. Anger and disbelief coursed through me as I scrolled through Bella's profile. There were more photos, subtle hints of their relationship hidden in plain sight. A picture at a restaurant with 2 wine glasses, a shot of a man's hand, Nathan's hand I recognized, holding hers. Each post was a breadcrumb leading to the painful truth of Nathan's betrayal. The pain of the discovery was sharp, but it also brought a strange sense of clarity. Nathan's late nights at the office, the weekends he was out with clients, they all made sense now. He wasn't just neglecting me, he had replaced me. I sat there, in the dim light of my office, feeling a mix of sadness and liberation. Sadness for the love I thought we had, and liberation from the lies I had been living. It was clear now, Nathan's affair wasn't just a fling. It was a deliberate choice, a choice that showed me where I stood in his life. But amidst the storm of emotions, a plan began to form in my mind. Nathan had underestimated me, thought me weak and compliant. He was wrong. I was an interior designer, a creator of spaces that told stories. And now it was time to rewrite my own story, one where I wasn't a victim but the architect of my own future. I spent the night poring over Bella's social media, gathering evidence. I needed to be prepared for the legal battles ahead. But more importantly, I needed closure. I needed to confront Nathan, not as the betrayed wife, but as a woman reclaiming her power. The next morning, I called my lawyer, my voice steady and resolute. "I have something that might interest you," I said, explaining my discovery. "It's time to set the record straight. It's time for Nathan to face the consequences of his actions." The revelation of Nathan's affair with Bella Harper changed everything. It was not just a betrayal. It was a mockery of the vows we had once taken so earnestly. The pain was deep, but it ignited a fire within me, a resolve to stand up for myself and reclaim my life. In the following weeks, I threw myself into my work with a renewed vigor, channeling my emotions into creativity. My designs were bolder, my concepts more daring. It was as if by freeing myself from Nathan's shadow, I had unleashed a part of me that was long suppressed. But the reality of my personal life couldn't be ignored. The divorce proceedings were underway, and with each meeting with my lawyer, I felt a step closer to freedom. I gathered all the evidence of Nathan's affair, preparing myself for the battles ahead. One evening, as I sat reviewing legal documents, Nathan walked in, his demeanor a strange mix of defiance and guilt. "So, you're really going through with this, huh?" he asked, his voice tinged with bitterness. "Yes, Nathan, I am," I replied calmly, without looking up from the papers. He let out a scoff. "You think you'll be better off without me? You think you can just throw away our marriage like it's nothing?" "Our marriage ended the moment you decided to be with someone else, Nathan," I said, finally looking at him. "I'm not throwing away anything. I'm just picking up the pieces of what you broke." Nathan's face hardened. "You'll regret this, Eliza. You're making a mistake." "No, Nathan. The mistake was thinking you would change, but I'm correcting that mistake now." He didn't respond, just turned and left the room, his silence more telling than words. The day of the final hearing arrived quicker than I had anticipated. Standing before the judge, I felt an odd sense of peace. This was it, the moment of truth. Nathan and I presented our cases, the evidence of his affair leaving him with little to defend. The judge's gavel sounded like a bell of liberation when the divorce was finalized. I walked out of the courtroom, a free woman. But this was not just a legal victory. It was a personal triumph. I had stood up against the injustice and disrespect that had colored my marriage. As I stepped outside, the sun seemed brighter, the air fresher. I was no longer Eliza, Nathan's wife. I was Eliza Bennett, a woman who had reclaimed her life, her identity. But this was just the beginning. The next chapter of my life was waiting to be written, and I was ready to be its author. The finality of the divorce brought a sense of closure, but it also opened a new chapter of confrontations and revelations. It was time to face Nathan and his mistress, Bella Harper, in a way they never expected. I continued to live in the same house with Nathan until everything was settled. Our interactions were minimal, cold, and strictly necessary. He had already started to bring Bella around, flaunting his new relationship in a way that seemed designed to provoke me. But I refused to give him that satisfaction. I was planning, waiting for the right moment to make my move. One evening, as I sat in my studio surrounded by my designs, I heard them laughing in the living room. Something about their carefree joy struck a nerve. It was a stark reminder of the life Nathan had shattered. My hands clenched into fists, not out of anger, but determination. It was time to act. The following day, I contacted my lawyer and initiated the final phase of my plan. "It's time to make them understand the consequences of their actions," I said with a resolve that surprised even me. The opportunity presented itself one weekend when Nathan announced that he was taking Bella on a trip. "We'll be gone for the whole weekend," he said, a smug smile on his face. "Enjoy your trip," I replied, my voice steady, giving nothing away. As soon as they left, I swung into action. I had already arranged for a moving company to come. Piece by piece, my belongings, everything I had brought into this house, everything that was mine, were carefully packed and removed. But I didn't stop there. I took everything that represented the life Nathan and I had built together, the furniture we had chosen, the art we had collected, the memories we had created. All of it, gone. When Nathan returned, he walked into an empty house. The shock on his face was palpable. "What have you done?" he stammered, looking around at the barren walls and empty spaces. "I did what I had to do," I said calmly. "I removed everything that was mine, everything that I contributed to this house." "This is insane, Eliza. You've taken everything." "Not everything, Nathan. Just what was rightfully mine. You wanted a new life with Bella, remember? I'm just helping you start from scratch." He looked around, defeated and bewildered. For the first time, I saw a flicker of regret in his eyes, but it was too late for regrets. As I turned to leave, I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders. I had taken back control of my life, piece by piece. Nathan and Bella were left to deal with the empty shell of a home, a fitting metaphor for the hollowness of their betrayal. The days following the great exodus of my possessions from the house were filled with a mix of liberation and reflection. I had taken a decisive step, one that was both empowering and symbolic. It was more than just reclaiming my belongings. It was about asserting my independence from a relationship that had long ceased to be a partnership. I had moved into a small, cozy apartment, a blank canvas that awaited my personal touch. It was in this new space, free from the shadows of the past, that I began to truly process everything that had happened. Meanwhile, Nathan and Bella faced the reality of their choices. The empty house was a constant reminder of the life that had been uprooted. I heard through mutual acquaintances that Nathan was struggling to come to terms with the changes. Bella, on the other hand, seemed more concerned with the loss of the material comforts than the relationship itself. It was during this time that I received an unexpected call. Nathan, his voice was a mix of anger and desperation. "Eliza, you've gone too far. You've taken everything. How could you?" I listened, a calmness enveloping me. "Nathan, I only took what belonged to me. You wanted a fresh start, remember? I'm just helping you with that. You've left us with nothing." His voice cracked, a sign of his fraying composure. "Nathan, you made your choices. Now you live with them. Bella wanted a life with you, and now she has it, just not the way she imagined." There was a pause, and for a moment I thought he had hung up. Then, quietly, he said, "I didn't think you'd actually do it. Sometimes, Nathan, we don't really know people until we see them in a new light." The call ended, leaving a profound silence in its wake. It was a conversation that marked the end of an era. I had spoken not with bitterness, but with the clarity of someone who had closed a painful chapter of her life. As days turned into weeks, I immersed myself in my work and the decoration of my new apartment. The creative process was therapeutic, each design choice a step towards rebuilding myself. I was rediscovering the passions and dreams I had before Nathan, reconnecting with the essence of who I was. One evening, as I sat on my new balcony, a sense of peace washed over me. The city lights twinkled in the distance, each a reminder of the possibilities that lay ahead. I had endured the storm and emerged stronger. In that moment, I knew that the tide had truly turned. I had moved beyond the pain and betrayal. I was no longer just surviving, I was thriving. In the months that followed, my life took on a rhythm of renewal and self-discovery. My new apartment became a sanctuary, a place where I could be myself without the shadows of a strained marriage. Meanwhile, the repercussions of my decisive actions were unfolding in ways I hadn't anticipated. Word reached me about Nathan and Bella's struggles. The luxurious life Bella had flaunted on social media had diminished significantly, her posts now a stark contrast to the opulence she once displayed. Nathan, on the other hand, seemed lost, his professional life suffering as he grappled with the personal upheaval. One day, as I sat in a cafe sketching designs for a client, I noticed Nathan walk in. He looked different. There was a weariness about him that I hadn't seen before. Our eyes met briefly, and in that fleeting moment, I saw a mix of regret and resignation. He approached me hesitantly. "Eliza, can we talk?" he asked, his voice lacking its former confidence. I nodded, setting aside my sketches. The conversation that ensued was a surreal experience. Nathan spoke of his regrets, of how he had underestimated me and the life we had. He talked about Bella, about how their relationship was nothing more than a facade, a superficial connection that paled in comparison to what we had. I listened, not with satisfaction but with a sense of closure. "Nathan, we both made choices," I said calmly. "You chose a path, and I chose mine. We can't undo the past, but we can learn from it." As Nathan left the cafe, I felt a final thread of our connection sever. It was an unspoken goodbye, a mutual acknowledgement that our chapter was closed. Emboldened by these events, I dove deeper into my career. My designs gained recognition, leading to more prestigious projects. I also reconnected with old friends and even made new ones. Life was busy, but it was a fulfilling kind of busy, one that brought a sense of accomplishment and joy. One evening, as I reviewed my latest project, I received a call from an old colleague, Mark, who had always been a supportive friend. He proposed a collaboration on an exciting new venture. It was an opportunity to stretch my creative muscles and be part of something innovative and challenging. As I mulled over Mark's proposal, I realized how far I had come. The pain and betrayal that once defined my days were now just faint echoes of a past life. In their place was a strong, confident woman who had taken charge of her destiny. I picked up the phone and called Mark. "I'm in," I said, a smile spreading across my face. It was time for new adventures, new challenges, and new stories to tell. Months had passed since my last encounter with Nathan, and my life had taken on a new, vibrant rhythm. The collaboration with Mark had been a resounding success, bringing both of us acclaim in the design world. My days were filled with creativity and purpose, a far cry from the uncertainty that had once clouded my life. But it wasn't just my professional life that had flourished. I had found a sense of peace and contentment in my personal life as well. My apartment was now a reflection of my journey. Every piece of furniture, every artwork, told a story of resilience and rebirth. One evening, as I sat on my balcony, a soft breeze playing with my hair, I allowed myself a moment of reflection. The journey from the turmoil of my marriage to where I was now had been long and fraught with challenges, but it had also been a journey of immense growth and self-discovery. I thought about Nathan and how our paths had diverged. I harbored no ill will towards him. Instead, I hoped he found the growth and peace he needed. As for Bella, I wished her well in her own journey of self-discovery. The phone rang, pulling me out of my reverie. It was an invitation to speak at a renowned design conference, an opportunity to share my journey and insights with others. I accepted with a sense of excitement and humility. As I prepared for the conference, I realized that my story was not just about the end of a marriage or the pain of betrayal. It was about the power of resilience, the beauty of starting over, and the importance of staying true to oneself. Standing on the stage at the conference, I looked out at the audience, a sea of eager faces, each on their own journey. I began to speak, not just as a designer, but as a woman who had navigated the depths of despair and emerged stronger. I stand before you today not just as a designer, but as someone who believes in the power of transformation, I began. Every space I design tells a story, and so does every moment of our lives. We have the power to redefine our spaces, our stories, and ultimately ourselves. The applause at the end of my talk was not just an acknowledgement of my words, but a celebration of the journey I had shared. As I left the stage, a sense of fulfillment washed over me. I had not only rebuilt my life, but had also found a way to inspire others with my story. Life, much like design, is about creating beauty from chaos, order from disorder, and joy from pain. And as I continued on my path, I carried with me the lessons of my past, a past that had shaped me but no longer defined me.